I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. What's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like. Again, I'm Jared Ball. This is BPM. Greetings, everyone. To those who will see this later, greetings to you as well. Welcome, everybody, to those who are here. To the remixers and all of those out there. Please do jump out. Let folks know to come on in. We have a very big show, and it was, I wanted to say, was slated to be a long show, but we'll see. We'll see what's possible. Because we have a number of guests coming through. We have Dayvon Love coming any minute now to talk about some fascinating work academically and how it relates to the political, at least as far as I'm concerned, and as it relates to the activist community with some of the latest ongoings with Campaign Zero, and how that relates historically to the rise of Brown v. Board as a focus and fight within the NAACP a half century ago. We'll see what he does with it, but in terms of what he gave me for homework, that's how I'm interpreting it. And the readings were fascinating, so I can't wait to do that. Then we're going to be talking with Dr. James Nadell about some work he's been doing around psychodynamics and Jimi Hendrix, which the work seems fascinating. I don't at all understand it, but it looks fascinating. And, you know, you kind of had me at Jimi because, of course, you know, and having played, as we like to remind folks, drums in the greatest funk band in Western Maryland between 1997 and 1999, Mama's Biscuits, we covered a number of Jimi songs, particularly when he was with the Band of Gypsies. We covered Stop. We covered we covered Little Wing at one point. We covered Red House at one point. We covered Stop. Then we covered did we do Power of Soul? I don't think we did Power of Soul, but we did we even did Machine Gun once. Anyway, there were other Jimi songs. Stop was my favorite though. Stop, baby, can't you see that I can't take it? Yeah. Because they had Buddy Miles, Billy Cox. It was great. It was great. Anyway, so we'll see what he has to say about all of that. And then at 10 a.m. the plan is to talk with Barrett Brown about some if folks will remember the political prisoner, digital journalist, activist, reporter, and who has, I'm still catching up to it. Just some very interesting perspective on what's going on with Joe Rogan, the connections to Peter Thiel, to Palantir. It's a little bit different from the conversation we're seeing. Obviously, a lot about race and censorship and all of that. It is interesting to note how many white folks are finding odd and interesting ways to justify Joe Rogan's racism. But this, to me, is a much more fascinating, much more fascinating and interesting perspective. So I look forward to that as well. So a lot coming up this morning. So please stick around, invite others to join us, and Dayvon will be here in a moment. So anyway, let's see. No, we didn't do The Wind Cries Mary. Most of what we did was the Band of Gypsies, other than once we did Little Wing and man, my memory is a mess. But yeah, but Stop was the joint. Stop was the joint. When they hit that break, stop, and then they come back in and it's just a little soulful bass and light on the, you know, baby, can't you see that I can't? When you had Jimi with that power, that power trio and that soul and that Buddy Miles on the drums and singing with his background in R&B, I mean, that was just, to me, perfect. Just brief. And I think Dr. Nadell has some interesting thoughts on, when I looked at the slides that were sent. And again, shout out to Aaliyah and Josh for helping put the show together. When I saw the slides, he does deal with this, and some of what I have seen in the past, or some of the interesting questions about what really went on with Jimi, his death, why did that Black Power trio get broken up, all of that. Anyway, good morning, greetings, everybody. It's good to see you all. Thanks for coming through. Hit the like button, hit the share button. Let somebody know to join us this morning. Retweet these things, all of that good stuff. Welcome to Coco as a new member. Yeah, you need the giant goofy Joe Rogan face so people know it's the clickbait. No, we didn't do crosstown traffic. Again, most of our stuff was with Band of Gypsies. That was our focus. The machine gun that he did with Band of Gypsies was that's the boy, oh boy, oh boy. Anyway, so let's get to it. He's the director of public policy for the Leaders of Beautiful Struggle, been here many times, gave me some homework. I did the homework. I am actually ready this morning for this. So let's bring him up here. Brother Dayvon Love, welcome. It's good to see you again. Welcome back.
Hey man, it's good to be on with you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound good. Sounds good.
All right, cool.
Sounds good. So I don't know exactly where you wanted to start. As we were setting this up, I basically said that the homework, as I was quickly trying to summarize it, was that starting with the most recent ongoing with Campaign Zero, DeRay McKesson and the Blue Vest, the Blue Vest and that whole crew. And then this piece you sent from, I think, Yale Law School Journal, the Yale Law Journal. So I'll see this. I'll look it back in a second. Pull it up in a second. In fact, the links to all of this are already in the show notes for everybody. I was saying the point became there is a historic precedent for outside white funding and influence, or as the article talks about, movement capture of Black politics that redirects that politics and ultimately leads to the nonsense we're seeing often today. So, but why don't you start with where you wanted us to go and lay out why you wanted to bring this up and all of that, and I'll start pulling up these articles.
Yeah. So you and I have had conversations offline just about a lot of the issues or critiques we have of the kind of so-called social movement organizations and just the broader ecosystem of it. And, just after what I find to be just a bunch of more recent conversation about it, I just felt the need to just get on the record, just my thoughts about all of it. Because, I've been fortunate enough that there are a bunch of people in the kind of so-called movement ecosystem that I know, that I've watched kind of up close, and have the experience of, being a part of an organization I co-founded that in many respects has put me in some context at odds with some of those folks. And so, and DeRay to me is just a good example of the difference in the example. So, I mean, really there are two things I want to start with initially. The first is that I actually think sometimes in the conversations about, folks talk about BLM or movement for Black Lives, I think sometimes people reduce the issues in terms of people being able to get exorbitant amounts of money or platform. I think sometimes that gets attributed to like character flaws, right? People being grifters, which there certainly is some of that. But I actually think the more important conversation is that it's a difference in methodology. That these are folks who are socialized and they really hold true to the belief that America can be better. You know what I mean? And to me, while that sounds really rudimentary, to me, that's like the basis of what I would call the difference in perspective. You know what I'm saying? Where these are folks for whom their thoughts about what it means to do activism work is about, we're going to make America a better place. And for me, I come from the school of thought that America is irredeemably racist. It's fundamentally a white supremacist society. And that if we're interested in actually Black people, being able to experience liberation and practice freedom, we have to build our own autonomous, revolutionary Pan-Africanist movement that isn't reliant on the society treating us better. And so, and I just think there's some people, and there's a book written by Barbara Rainsby called All Black Lives Matter, where she actually documents, some of the different iterations of so-called movement in our current moment. And myself and LBS is included in it. And one of the things that struck me in rereading it a few months ago is in the introduction, she talks about how a lot of the movement for Black Lives, what became movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter, many of them were folks who were supportive of Barack Obama's run in 2008 for president and saw it as like hope, for Black people. I remember being in 2008 and being like, why would people who understand white supremacy, imperialism, capital, why would people who understand that think that Obama would be anything other than what he became, right? And so when I read that, it just made the movement, it made a lot of this ecosystem movement make so much sense, because many of them came from a place where they saw Obama as hope. Now, Ransby writes that she's just, a lot of them are disappointed by the lack of progress in Obama. But to me, the fact that would even be an option, right? In 2008, that was the first time I was old enough to vote in a presidential election. I voted for Cynthia McKinney and Rose Clemente, right? Because I was super clear, right? Two Black women. And I was super clear that wasn't the case. And then the other thing I want to say, just by way of intro to the topic, is that I just don't think there's enough conversations about money and social movements, like how to sustain social movements. And I think and so sometimes those discussions get had almost separately, as if there's something else. And I'm a believer that the way that you feed yourself, the way that you make your money, is the limit of your politics. And until we have sophisticated conversations about that, then it's going to produce the campaign zeros and all the, the some of the grifting that we see. Like, all those things are going to happen if we don't have sophisticated conversations about social movements and how they sustain themselves.
All right. First of all, I messed up already because I forgot to remind everybody that and to greet everybody and welcome everybody to.
It's Black Fist Fridays.
I mix what I like. Did that come through clearly? I'm just checking my audio real quick.
Yes, sir.
Did that come through clearly? Okay. So let me welcome everybody again to Black Fist Fridays. And so let me all right, so let me start. If you don't mind, let me start with a little bit of the silliness and work backwards. because there were a couple things in this article that I thought were interesting that because I haven't really followed this that closely, but the article is an interesting recap, into the development and the rise of Campaign Zero, and the main figures in the leadership. Starting with the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, and the coverage of that by this the young sister. I forgot who did what now. Who did what now? Is it LZ that was the one? Is that how you say her name?
Netta. I don't know how you say her last name. I know her Twitter name is Netta.
Netta, right? So she was the one. Okay, because right, I don't think they call her that in this, right?
Yeah, her name is Janetta.
Oh, Janetta LZ, right? I'm sorry, right?
Right.
Netta, right? Sorry about that. So Netta films it, brings in the rest, and somehow I just thought it was interesting that Teach for America, which has its own interesting background. I have forgotten that DeRay was connected to that. Yeah, go ahead.
And can I say something? And so to me, that's a part of when we talk about like people's proximity to institutions and how it gives them access to a platform. Teach for America isn't just a program that brings in teachers. Teach for America also now has gained, and its networks have gained some political salience. So for instance, in Maryland, our Senate president is an alum of Teach for America. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And Teach for America has networks where its goal is to attain political power using kind of this nonprofit network. So in many ways, DeRay isn't random.
Mm-hmm.
And to go a little bit even further into DeRay, his connection to Teach for America as kind of a white liberal nonprofit container. DeRay comes out of that nonprofit container here in Baltimore. Like I'm from Baltimore, grew up in Baltimore, and two of the programs he comes out of, Youth as Resources and Safe and Sound Campaign, organizations that are run by white folks, organizations that don't train the young people in, social movement activity. LBS actually had a confrontation years ago with the Safe and Sound Campaign, the White Woman Hathaway Therapy, who runs the organization, who essentially was trying to usurp the fight against a $104 million juvenile detention facility, trying to usurp that the social capital from the Black grassroots organizations, right, that were involved in actually pushing that effort forward. And so we had to criticize her for that. So DeRay, both from Safe and Sound Campaign to Teach for America, these are similar liberal nonprofit containers that produce people with this kind of integrationist liberal ideology. And again, many of them had not even been exposed. And in fact, years ago, when we made this criticism, there were Black people who got mad at us, wouldn't talk to us for years, because they were like, oh, these are good white people. They like us and doing stuff for us. And years later, many of them have come back and said, you were right. Right. So I said, to say that like DeRay isn't random. And the Teach for America part is important because it's an entire network from which the nonprofit industrial complex is able to essentially curate the kinds of Black people that get access to this kind of platform.
Okay. Yeah, and please stop me and jump in if there was something in particular that you wanted to bring out from this article. Otherwise, I'm just going through some of the literal highlights that I have from it. But the article is saying here, like, similar stories of movement organizations that have been thrust into the spotlight. This is a tale of how something so promising collapsed because of ego and misguidance. But it is also one that measures the evolution of progressive views and how the ideas behind Campaign Zero got left behind. So the point, long story short, is that there was good intentions. These folks got together, and then more or less they say that DeRay messed it all up. They started blowing up. They got Oprah Winfrey was praising them, Barack Obama, Jack Dorsey of Twitter, Ariana Grande, all calling them out, saying that they're doing great work. But then tensions started to arise over claim credit and who's doing what. As it says here, even as the conflict between and this was one of the questions. Let me just stop here before I forget. One of the things I wanted to ask you, because I've noticed it, just sort of almost accidentally. So as we've talked a little bit about here already, Patrice Cullors has come out recently and said with a book that's supposed to be about abolition, or is coming out with one. There's another example that I already forgot. But then here we read again how one of the points that's raised in this article is that DeRay initially did not like, or Campaign Zero did initially not like or agree with the branding or the calls for abolition, and thought it was a deterrent or hampered what their goals were. And then after it blew up and there was the shift in the zeitgeist, now all of a sudden DeRay, is by the end of this article talking about more or less, I'm ready to get on board with abolition. It just seems so shady and opportunist like, but consistent with obviously what this article is intending for its readers to walk away with. But even as the conflict between abolition and reform groups grew, several activist leaders were becoming famous. The co-founders of Black Lives Matter were gracing the covers of magazines. McKesson, Packnett, Cunningham, and Elsie were being named on influential power lists and appearing on television. Other activists such as Tamika Mallory and Sean King were also being signed to speaker bureaus, where they were being paid top dollar. In 2019, a giant photograph of McKesson was hung in the National Portrait Gallery. Speaking of those who make big paydays and spend time in major art centers, Brother Kaba, good morning to you. Good to see you. I don't know if you heard it.
Peace, Brother Kaba.
Good morning. How y'all doing?
So can I say something about that, Jared?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely. Yep.
So there are a few things. One is, and I you previously had Dylan Rodriguez on to talk about the way that abolition is being co-opted, right? I think in many ways, abolition, his critique of how people have been using it, I think applies both to, Black Lives Matter and to, DeRay, which I feel it isn't a close reading of what abolition is supposed to be, which is about, understanding the root of this carceral system, or the society based on carcerality, and the importance of having a trajectory of politics that actually moves in that direction. And I think abolition has become the sexy buzzword. But the thing, one of the things also, you had on Todd Stephen Burrows recently, and where he said that, in his experience, he talked about the difference between an activist and a revolutionary, and understanding that a revolutionary would be an honor to be criticized by the New York Times. And to me, this is one of the problems with the way in which activism is conducted today, because being seen and featured in all these major outlets, one should have the opposite. They should have the opposite effect, right? That these aren't outlets that we should trust to identify who movement leaders are. And so this again goes to show the flaw in the methodology that a lot of people are socialized, by in terms as it relates to doing activist work, right? And so, so to me, that was just almost, and I'm glad you highlighted this piece, because to me, this is the problem. Even as these factions see themselves as different, to me, this is one of the underlying things that in many ways make them more similar than different.
Okay. Anyway, talking about spreading the gospel of wokeness. It was around this time that McKesson decided to run for mayor in Baltimore, which I know you saw up close, Dayvon. LZ questioned his decision to enter the race. It was a disaster, and it lacked the principles that every organizer should know, she says. When I got there, he had too many white people working on his campaign in Baltimore, a very black city. When I would knock on doors, many of the locals didn't know who he was or thought that his campaign was a joke. Even though on the ground canvassing proved to be a bust, DeRay did a lot of outside campaign did get a lot of outside campaign money, but that was about it. McKesson disputes the idea, says he had black women in all the leadership roles, but he did go on to raise $250,000, but got less than 3% of the vote. Elsie goes on to accuse him of erasing her and her work, taking credit for what she had been doing, as did their other colleague who did a lot of the digital programming. He was, this is talking about, now this is actually something I can say I witnessed up close myself. That is in not in this way, but the point being made here is that when McKesson went on to promote his autobiography, and I love, and especially the older I get, I have to say, I know I sound like that old man, but I love how all these young people who've been around for 5 minutes are writing memoirs and autobiographies. It's like, damn, anyway, but he was promoting this in 2019. But he was heckled during a book tour stop in St. Louis by a local black activist who accused him of exaggerating the role he played in the city during the protest. This is a lie. This is not the truth, DeRay. The protester yelled, "You ain't no part of us. Stop using us. You've made money off of us constantly." Now, I can say the point I was making is that before this in 2015 or whatever, when I was working with The Real News and we were covering some of the Freddie Gray uprising, I went downtown one day to cover some protest, and I'm standing there, and the police were out there, blocking traffic and being police and whatever, but they weren't, overly, they were just being regular. I mean, they were just doing their regular job. They weren't even in this case overly. White people. They weren't even, they weren't even doing that. But a crowd had gathered, and at one point there was some sort of commotion, and you could feel the energy going towards this commotion, and I'm standing there in relative calm and safety, and to my left is DeRay. And all of a sudden, he turns to his colleague, somebody he was with, hands his phone to the dude, runs himself into the crowd, like throws himself into the crowd. And then all of a sudden his colleague, and I'm standing there like this is surreal, like this, and his colleague starts yelling, "They got DeRay! They got DeRay!" And then it's like, and I'm standing there like, are you serious? And then he comes out and comes back walking towards the dude and says, no, it's all good. I'm okay. Don't worry. It's okay. I'm okay. And I'm sitting there like, of course you're okay, because nothing's happening. And you threw yourself into the nothing. And now you're coming back and creating a little news story about how you survived the conflict in these streets or whatever. And I was like, wow, this is how this works. And so anyway, so when I see, so there have to have been many more examples of that other people were witness to and had greater experience with, as apparently was the case with people calling him out in St. Louis. So anyway,
so
yeah, go ahead.
So Dayvon, I don't know if you heard that, but I heard Dr. Jared Ball say that DeRay is to his left. Is that what he said?
I think I heard that too. I think that's what I heard from that whole thing. That's what I did from the whole conversation, from the whole episode. I just want the record to reflect that Dr. Ball just said
that. Yeah, clip that and put this in these YouTube streets. That's funny. That's hilarious. Anyway, so as they go on, I don't know, DeRay, did you want to add or respond to any of that? Otherwise, we can. I'll just pull out a few more of these highlights. No, go ahead.
So two things. One, like you said, I was there, and I've actually had one-on-one conversations with DeRay about a lot of this. And what's interesting to me, so the part about him running for mayor, most people did think it was ridiculous, and I think part of the issue is with DeRay and others like him like to do is to like make themselves victims. Like, people don't like me or people are hating on me because I'm famous or whatever. And the thing that makes Baltimore, unique as a city, and I'm sure other cities may have versions of this, Baltimore people like people who've been around. Like they like people who they've seen outside the context of whatever it is they're known for. They like, so have they seen you in the grocery store? Have they seen you at, community events? Have they seen you at the community cleanup? Right? Like, have they seen you around? And DeRay had not been around, did not have a base, particularly a Black base in Baltimore. And to Netta's point, I went to an event that he held in Baltimore at what was then the Living Well on Charles Street, just to check it out, because I'm open to being wrong, right? And I showed up, and the Living Well, which is a space that was owned by Black women, controlled by Black women, when I went in, it was probably 85% white people in the room. You know what I mean? And so, it's one of those things that told me everything I needed to know, about who his base is and continues to be. And in my conversations with him and my conversations about that, he can be tricky. And one of the things that he would say to me in response to that is he would describe this argument that I'm making now as an attempt at like a Black authenticity test, right? And to me, and so I had to say that, I said, I see what you're trying to do, right? And some people, that may be their approach to this, but I was saying my point to him is about who you're accountable to. So I'm not trying to measure your Blackness, right? I'm trying to understand who are the people for whom you deliver results to, and therefore lift you up as a person that represents their interests. And again, I'm fortunate, here in Baltimore and increasingly around the state of Maryland, particularly in our legislative work, they're like actual people I'm accountable to. You know what I'm saying? They're actual Black people for whom we've been able to deliver concrete material results to. And as a result of that, that's how we get, lifted up in the way that we do. So I just think that's an important piece, just in a broader conversation about movement work, because I just don't think, again, for me, it's simple. Who is benefiting from what you're doing, right? And for LBS, that's been a singular focus of ours. Because if Black people are benefiting from the work that we're doing, right, then that justifies us being in spaces and representing positions that advance the quality of life for Black people. And I would argue folks like DeRay and others in the larger movement don't hold themselves to that standard. They don't hold themselves to the standard of what is the evidence in the community of the impact of the work that they've done, right? Because the answer to that question is very little.
So let me just share one more piece from this article that I thought was fascinating towards the end, and then because I do want to get to this other piece that is much more substantive and fascinating. That I think you wanted me and us to see as an antecedent to all of this, as laying down the history to all of this. But this I thought was very interesting towards the end of the article. And forgive me, I don't know how to pronounce this person's name. Sinyangwe said, who was one of the programmers and key part of the leadership of Campaign Zero, said that despite our best efforts to seek compromise and agreement over the organizational strategy, it became clear that DeRay preferred to continue operating without regard for the vision or expertise of the other co-founders or regard for the work being done by others in the movement. LZ agrees. In retrospect, I do not believe that all four of the co-founders were supposed to make it to the end with this organization that we created, she says. I thought that was an interesting statement. I was working with a person who was interested in advancing Black liberation and himself at the same time, which isn't a bad thing, but does become problematic when you begin to prioritize the self, over the people. Now, this was my favorite part, though. Today, Packnett Cunningham is pursuing media careers, an MSNBC contributor and podcast host.
But you know what, Jay?
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Because you know what? And see, this is the thing. I don't think folks like that get why that's funny. I think that's part of the challenge. Like, folks like that don't get why that's funny.
That might be. That's probably an example, though, Dayvon, of the hate that my man was trying to project onto you. It's really the other people who are like him trying to get in that lane, and because he's actually advancing farther than they are, then he's interpreting that as hate, which it is in that particular instance, as strange as it is. And he has maybe even in his own mind convinced himself that anybody who criticizes him is doing the same thing that this person just did.
Right.
It might just be that
He's full of shit.
That part too.
but I mean, I don't know, because I think part of the problem that I see being laid out here is just as they are criticizing someone from becoming too focused on the self and self-promotion, they see getting into one of the most self-promotional and politically empty spaces is progress, and a logical conclusion to the work that they're doing. And so that's why, so if we can, and I put the link in the show notes already, because people, I think this article should be read more than the one time I've read it, and should probably be talked about a lot more. And if I could just start with the silliness, my favorite part, if I understood what I was reading, is that this is a Black woman checking a white liberal man, right? These are two scholars going back and forth on this history, and it's a sister trying to be as polite and professional as she can, saying to this white liberal dude who self-identifies as a white liberal, my man, you don't understand how to read the history and what Black people are saying to one another. So let me just share at least the title, and then I'll let you start off with whatever you would want. I mean, I'll share, the thing here so people can see what we're talking about. And then if you would like, you can get us started talking about this article that I think is fascinating: Movement Capture or Movement Strategy, a Critical Race History Exchange on the Beginnings of Brown versus Board. Megan Ming Francis and John Fabian Witt are the two discussants. I don't know anything about any of them other than what was said here, and it's fascinating. So anyway, Dayvon.
Yeah. Right. So a part of why I wanted to include this in conjunction with the DeRay piece and Black Lives Matter piece is because I think this notion of movement capture is an interesting and important concept. And I say that because, as again, you and I have talked about offline, there isn't enough conversation about the relationship between money and activism, and that has a history that goes back, in terms of social movements, even back into the mid 19th century, when Martin Delany criticizes the Liberator, which was one of the official organs of the abolitionist movement, that it only had 3 Black people hired at any of the offices nationally on the work of abolition. And his argument is either you don't think Black people are capable, or you don't actually believe in Black people being equal. So I think or human beings. And so I think so for me, understanding that legacy is important to putting in perspective the kinds of movements that exist today. And so for me, again, in terms of conversations about the DeRays, of Black Lives Matter, Move for Black Lives, I think the conversation about those, I think sets the political history that is necessary to really be able to deal to understand the political consequences and dynamics of what happens when people see movements as proximity to white resources as opposed to like base building and whatnot. And one of the things that I'm critical of in terms of Megan Ming Francis's work, because there's another piece where she actually, lays out the movement capture argument. And she talks about how the NAACP shifted its focus to education away from things like anti-lynching because of money that it was getting from the Garland Fund. The thing that she doesn't mention is the fact that one of the places where the NAACP and the UNIA collaborated briefly was on anti-lynching legislation. And that a part of why the UNIA walked away from that collaboration was because the NAACP and some of the other, kind of more liberal Black organizations, they were willing to compromise on legislation for it to be more symbolic than to actually have federal statute that would, make it a federal crime to engage in lynching. And so the omission of Garvey from her analysis, at least, in the other piece, I think is something that, it's important to talk about, So I'll stop there before I get too much.
No, that's interesting. And like I said, I'm not familiar with her work beyond this. So there's a lot I would need to catch up to. But this was so essentially, and then we can I'll just keep it as simple as I think I can make it. But essentially, the argument was, or the difference between what the two are saying is that the Garland Fund, this white philanthropic group that's supposed to be helping with oppressed communities, in the 19th century, right? That's where we are, right?
20th
century. Sorry,
early.
Right, early 20th century. They are the argument between these two scholars is that the Garland Fund either from their directive and initiative offered more funding to the NAACP to move them away from issues of racial violence and into education, or which is what the sister is saying. That's more like what she's saying. The white dude is saying no, and in fact, he actually accuses her of not giving Black people enough agency by saying, they actually were the agents of this and sought out the Garland Fund money because they wanted to move in that direction on their own. That is away from racial violence. That his argument, if you read the documents, they are on their own volition, moving away from concerns over lynching, anti-lynching campaigns, racial violence, etc., and wanting to move into education, and therefore sought out the relationship with the Garland Fund as a natural offshoot or extension of that shift in interest. Part of my response was it almost doesn't matter which side is right or wrong. It's because it's the fact of them feeling a need to get white funding, period, whether they are the agents of it or whether they are being moved by agents. The point for me was the initial context of an organization feeling like they need white money to move forward with whatever it is they want to do. And I feel like that point doesn't really get addressed in this particular exchange, which was one thing I thought was interesting. But anyway, but I had never heard of this history. I have never heard of any of these arguments, admittedly. So I was very much, just sort of interested in that whole piece being debated. And I did like the way this was done. I admit I like the scholarly way that they did this. It's like well-written emails with footnotes. But anyway, do you think that I summarized that well? And is there and what else would you want to draw from that? Or were there any other particular points that you wanted to draw from that in making the comparison to today?
Yeah, I mean, I think the guy who describes himself as a white liberal, I think one of the things that often gets missing, is a question of historiography, like what kinds of histories get elevated. So you think about attempts at trying to steer Black social movements, a big part of why NAACP, continues to exist is because of its proximity to power and those resources and the attempt, both politically and historiographically, to omit, right, to frame out other kinds of politics that were wildly popular amongst Black people at the time. And so even like Brown versus Board of Education, the way that it get the historiography of that, where when you look at some of the, again, late 19th century, early 20th century efforts on Black people around issues of education, it wasn't about integration. It was about equitable access to resources in order to help build up the Black educational institutions and other institutions, that they had to build themselves. And so, for me, that's one of those things, again, in talking about the importance of, independent Black institutions, right, that in many respects, have a mass-based following, that history gets omitted from white liberals. And so it positions entities like the Garland Fund to position the NAACP as like the natural representative of Black people's interests because it happens to be closer in proximity to it and not our community.
Oh, hold on,
That's
Kaba. Hold on. Let me go ahead. Go ahead. Say it again. Hold on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was say that's a good point because especially that connection with the NAACP and then also the integration piece because it's still the whole push behind integration was again around proximity to whiteness. It was that we couldn't have our own schools given just adequate equal resources. No, we had to be close to them. We had to be bused closer to them. I'm from the South, and my mother's sister, her younger sister, was the first class that was integrated. And it's funny with Brown because people keep talking about 1954, but a lot of those places didn't get integrated, quote unquote, until like the 70s. And my mother's younger sister was the first class that was integrated into the bigger white school in 1970. That's how long it took. 1970. So 16 years. But I remember her, and every year they still talk about going to her and her classmates. They still have reunions, every so often, and they still count themselves as being graduates of the black school that they were at. And in many cases, the black students who were forced to go to the white schools did not want to go to the white schools. They said very explicit. There's a newspaper article in one of the local black papers that came out a couple of years ago in their 50th anniversary, or no, their 40th anniversary graduation class, and they were all talking about the fact that they did not want to go to the white school. They were perfectly happy at the black school, and they said they didn't understand why they had to be bused all the way out there when they could have just walked to their black school. So that point, that's something that resonates with me personally. And then secondly, because my city where I'm from is so white, it's like over 85% white. The integration kind of worked in a different way because in situations like that, which were not the norm, obviously, the white students some white students ended up having to go to the school that was formerly black. And that happened in 1972. And when that was announced, all of a sudden the school got bombed. So that's just another little tidbit of information that sometimes gets overlooked.
Wow.
See that again as the failure of white society to make non-violence work.
There it is.
That's one instance where the toy actually came in handy, brother Dr. Paul. I appreciate you for that.
It's gonna. So I found the line that I was looking for. When the dude writes back to her, he says, "But I see genius and agency where you see victimhood." He says to her, and she say, which that line particularly bothered me because he's telling the black woman that when you raise the critique that white philanthropy would be designed to redirect black politics into safer directions, you're claiming victimhood. And I really don't like when that language gets turned around. I have a particular pet peeve when people who are victimized claim victimhood, and that's somehow a negative. I think, being a victim is in and of itself is not a negative. So she was just performing an analysis, and then, and he comes back with that anyway, I just wanted to find that line. That was it. I don't really have anything more on that.
Yeah. I mean, and I think I think part of what that lacks is an analysis of political economy. Like when people don't have money, people are going to find ways to get access to it. And that's a part of, the pernicious nature of capitalism, right? Is understanding that, if you got money, you're going to be able to shift where people go because Black people, given our circumstance in the United States, don't have it to the extent that we need. And one of the things that I think happens a lot contemporaneously in social movement spaces, and I've had people say versions of this to me, which is like, I'm going to get their money, I'm going to feign like I'm going to do what they want, and then I'm going to do what I want to do. You know what I mean? And part of the problem is that the work and energy it takes to be in the networks where that money is, the work it takes to pretend, quote unquote, to do what they want you to do, that work takes you away from actually doing the work of building a base, right? And I think one of the things, and this is one of the things I wanted to get to, is that I just feel like because of what I describe as like a doctrinaire, caricaturish critique of capitalism, that particularly, Black left organizations have not sufficiently thought about ways to sustain their organizations. And so the result of that is that people then go to philanthropy, right?
Mhm.
And it's almost like this default where people feel like because they're a nonprofit or get money from philanthropy, that makes them less of a capitalist, right? Like LBS, we're an organization that's funded by, people that give us money monthly. We also do, like some fee for service stuff, right? We have like a social entrepreneurship model in terms of how we sustain ourselves. And that approach in terms of how we sustain ourselves provides us greater levels of autonomy than those who are reliant straight up on the public sector or on the nonprofit industrial complex. And so I just find that in conversations about like sustainable organizations that can spend the majority of their time like doing Black liberation work, like work to really do the work of building, Black sovereignty, Black self-determination, addressing some of the ways that this society is, in the short and immediate term is doing harm to our community. That and this for me, this is why the Garvey thing was important, right? And there's certainly things to critique about the UNIA, but the UNIA in its approach to anti-lynching was able to move based on what was best for Black people, as opposed to what the Garland Fund wanted them to work on, right? And that's just the reality that Garvey had an institution that was not funded by philanthropy, and therefore on that particular matter of policy, UNIA was able to have some integrity, right, in terms of how they were able to deal with the anti-lynching issue, as opposed to the NAACP, which, to Dr. Francis's point, was moved away off of its square because of the need for resources, because of its reliance on white philanthropy.
So this is what I think comes up, even comes into either synchronicity or conflict with my argument around the after party, and around and well, not even that, but even more broadly around the argument around political versus economic power. That there is no catching up economically before we can move politically. So at some point, it seems to me that people either have to be willing to work with a smaller base of revenue or find alternative income outside of their organizational work, or they will likely become professional activists bought off by an establishment that leads them ever to the right. So my point, without, like, for instance, staying with LBS more so than the UNIA and not being at all in your bank accounts and pockets, my assumption would then be that you all would have to be willing on principle to exist, to live off of less money, to work with less money, and to work with different levels of fame and elite political access in order to do the work that you're doing. And the point I think has to be in broader support of that work is that more of us have to be willing to volunteer our time as activists and organizers, and to provide what is our only real power, which is numbers. That's all that we have, is numbers.
So I would say two things to that.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
So one is, I think you and I are in agreement in terms of the importance of politics. We're not going to catch up. So getting our quote unquote money right is not going to get us to the place where we actually can have real power in the society to protect ourselves from, racist, white supremacist, colonialist attack on our humanity. So that I feel clear about, and I think we're in agreement on. I think, and so the second part in terms of, having to take less money, having to get, less access to elite circles, I think that is true. But I do think that when we think about building organization, like, I think we have to be able to imagine a business model that makes it so that people don't have to be broke and do the work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the point where, because I think sometimes I see people make being broke and an activist a virtue. And that's just not an effective way to do the work. And it's a part of, for those of us who consider ourselves, revolutionary, committed to Black liberation, much of the scholarship and the stuff we read and talk about doesn't get us to that place. Like, it doesn't talk about like a business model, right? Because I think sometimes people feel icky about even the notion of a business model, you know what I'm saying? Because you see yourself as, as a leftist. But to me, it's like everybody has a business model. They just don't call it that, right? If you work at a nonprofit, that's a business model, right? If you work at a separate job or do you work on the side, that's a business model. And so the question is, what is your relationship to the capital that sustains you, right? And so I think organizations that are doing political work, because there are different kinds of work that are important that aren't necessarily political per se. But if you see yourselves doing political work, you need a business model such that, folks in power can't make phone calls to take away your resources. But you also need to have a business model that allows you enough resources to be able to actually substantively do the work. You know what I'm saying? And have a business model, which again, I'm very proud of, for which the basis of LBS's ability to make money is based on our ability to deliver results to Black people, right? So it's not based on whether certain funders like us, right? It's not based on whether we get on television or not. It's based on a community of folks that say their work, we see their work, we feel the benefits of their work. And so I think that is the conversation that, unfortunately, in a lot of the meetings that I've been in or conversations I've been in, I just haven't heard enough fleshing out of what it would take to actually build an organization that, again, isn't balling, like isn't rich, you know what I'm saying, but actually has the resources it needs to like really get it done.
But see, that's what I'm saying. I don't think that there is a business model for that. There is a business model to sustain a core group of people who are permanently ensconced in organizational work to live and obviously not suffer materially, but they can't be buying $1 million homes, and they can't be, living in elite apartments and downtown lofts and all this other kind of stuff either. Because because I don't think there is a business model that is sustainable, and there's nothing that protects against if a group or movement reaches a certain point that we would hope it would reach, that those in power wouldn't be able to shut off the resources anyway. I mean, there's no business model free from resources being cut off by the state when they really want to get to it. So that's why I'm saying, like, we need this part. I don't know exactly how to do, obviously, but the point I think has to be the focus needs to be encouraging people to, in addition to whatever they're doing to survive on a daily basis, to put in some service to some sort of, on some level, to some organization or struggle. So my point initially is in terms of the after party point, for instance, is that this is just an issue of voting. So it's not a matter of, you don't have to, there's no other sort of material risk or need for fundraising to make a politically educated choice to vote for someone you yourself have played a role in vetting the platform of and candidacy of. So for instance, just as an example, or supporting promoting the work of the organizations that are doing what we need done, doesn't necessarily require tremendous amounts of money or time necessarily for everybody. It requires certain levels of political education and commitment and agreement in terms of certain base matter levels of behavior. But I think what without starting from the sort of anchor point I'm advocating, it's too easy to go into the directions we're talking about here. I mean, how much money is needed for how many organizations to do what? Like, for instance, and I'll stop here, but part of this is age, part of this is politics, part of this is whatever in my relationship to the struggle at this point. But as I was reading that Campaign Zero article, other than some vague references here or there, I hadn't heard or felt the impact of or seen any of the whatever they've supposed to have been doing all these years, making all this money with all this attention from all these superstars and political fame, whatever. So I'm saying, I'm like, and yet the kind of work I'm talking about that I would like to see happening, the direct action, the strikes, the shutting of things down, that doesn't require funding per se, as much as it requires just certain levels of commitment from an organized, group of people. But anyway, let me stop. Go ahead.
Yeah. So real quick, and I do got to bounce, but real quick, and it probably calls for a part two. I think the things you name do require resources. It's a question, and I do think it does. Some of it is about commitment. Like a lot of it is about commitment. It doesn't require resources. The idea of having individual people in the community fund a movement is a business model, right? And so that's what I mean when I say business model. I'm not necessarily talking about like big corporation. You know what I mean? I'm talking about like if funding an organization means building a system where the community is funding the movements that represent it, that's a business model. So the question becomes, how do you operationalize it? Like, how do you make it happen? And again, we were fortunate enough to find like some technology, right, that helps us to be able to do that. We have, an approach to how we promote the work that we do that allows us to do that, so that, we're an organization where there are over 600 people that give us money monthly to do our work, right? And, 90% of those folks are folks in Baltimore City, right? So, you know what I mean? So it's like when I say business model, like having discussions about how do we, build these approaches to sustaining the work that, again, is accountable to the community. So that's what I mean when I say business model, to be able to have the resources to effectively do the things that you describe. You know what I mean? But again, I do got to bounce, man.
No, that's cool. I'm going to say one more thing in your absence about this article and what she says about code switching. But there's many more parts to this, man. So anytime, you're welcome back, man. Appreciate you, man.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you.
All right. Take care.
All right. Peace.
All right, everybody. Big thanks to Dayvon. Brother Kaba is working his way back, and we're endeavoring to figure out where our next guests are. But in the interim, there was one other piece, because I did want to come back to this article for this one part in it, because in this exchange, and it's fascinating, where Dr. Francis essentially is telling Professor Witt, in a very polite and professional way, you don't know how to hear Black people and read Black history. So she says here, I also try to think through what code switching sounded like in the late 1920s. And by that, I mean how Black people change what they say and how they talk when white people are around, and or when they think white people are listening. I did this in an effort to begin to address Du Bois's theory of double consciousness, in which he explained the sense of looking at oneself through the eyes of the others, and that Blacks constantly have to think about how they are perceived by non-Blacks. If we believe Du Bois, then how might we incorporate his double consciousness theoretical framework into our archival analysis of this period? How does it disrupt and challenge how we traditionally read archives? I really like what she does here, and I'm sure she's not the first. I'm sure I've seen other examples of it or whatever, maybe or whatever. I don't remember, but I just think this is dope. Myself and the majority of Black people I know code switch today. So surely the NAACP's Black leaders practiced some variation of code switching in this earlier period when they interacted with white funders. This does not mean that I did not take everything at face value in the archives, but for my analysis, it meant that in situations that directly involved the Garland Fund, that I probed deeper the words that were written or stated out loud. I think that's brilliant and perfect analysis, or methodology rather, to bring to research. So I love that she did that. So the example, right. So one example that I would like to highlight revolves around how to interpret Walter White's response to Morris Ernst, whom I argue is leading the education charge at the Garland Fund. I know most watching this already know, but Walter White was at the time, the Black head of the NAACP, and Morris Ernst, the white delegate, I guess, from the Garland Fund. When pressed by Johnson, now who is Johnson? I forgot what the Johnson is here. But anyway, when pressed by Johnson why he has not written Ernst back, White responds, "At last here is the memorandum drafted along the lines which you suggested. This is only a rough draft. This is only a rough copy for you, Lewis, and Jim to use as a basis. I have no pride of authorship, so don't hesitate to speak frankly about it. Read on its own, it's a bit innocuous, but when read in consideration of the power dynamics at play and in context with the rest of White's correspondence over the previous decade, most of which is rapid and detailed, it is clear that he is signaling his disapproval with the process by declaring he has no pride of authorship. In many ways, White embodies the frustration of Black voices in a Jim Crow racial order in which their perspectives are only made visible when they comported with white notions of rights making. This brief explanation of my historical methodology is perhaps partly responsible for our divergences on two key aspects of the narrative." Anyway, so I thought that was what she does there is brilliant. I encourage everybody to read this article for the more complex details and nuances, etc. But not only is she helping us understand today, that is, Dr. Francis helping us understand today the limitations of white philanthropic involvement, nonprofit involvement in Black political struggle. But she's showing in this particular instance, in the exchange with her colleague, the shortcomings of even a white liberal analysis of Black history, saying your historical methodology is making you miss key points being made and said there. I just think it's fascinating. It's fascinating. So anyway, I encourage everybody to check it out. Brother Kaba is back. Our next guest, Dr. James Nadell, if I'm saying that correctly, if not, he'll correct me, is waiting in the wings himself. So we are going to move on here very quickly after this very, very, very quick break. So don't go anywhere. Much more coming up here on our Mix What I Like at BPM. Don't move.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
All right, Brother Kaba, we got you back. It's good to see you.
Yeah, my apologies, man. I'm kind of like on the run right now. I got an engagement, but there was so much richness in the conversations, man, that you sent me. I was like, I got to try to get some of it, and then my earpiece is not acting right. So,
Appreciate it.
Yeah, great conversation.
Anyway,
and Walter White, man. I came across him, man, when I was writing my thesis in undergrad, and he wrote that first of all, he was, like you said, he was the head of the NAACP, and he could pass, quote unquote, or, for a white, and he did that for a little bit, just almost as I guess a surreptitious kind of reconnaissance kind of piece, and he gathered a whole lot of information, and he wrote this book called Rope and Faggot. That was the name of the book, and it was a fascinating book because I came across it as a part of my research. And he was talking about the fact that, of course, the racism, but he was talking about the fact that in the South, and particularly, I think he studied Virginia, and it might have been some other places. It's been a long time since I wrote that thing. But he said in Virginia, he said part of the problem that whites had in terms of racism, especially in the South, is that obviously that's where the majority of Blacks are. But also a lot of them, he said, he counted, I don't know how he came to this research, but 80%, upwards of 80% of white Virginians had some Black ancestry or some mixture, and that kind of played into some of the anxiety around race and these purity laws and the separate and miscegenation laws and all that other stuff, was that they didn't want people to be able to slip through, and like him, because the irony was that he was actually the product of what they were fearing. So I thought that was an interesting piece but that was the name of the book. I forget when it came out. But yeah, so I just wanted to bring that up. And since you brought up his name, it kind of brought back that memory.
Well, speaking to someone who strikes fear in the hearts and minds of many to this day for a variety of reasons, because having been, of course, as I need to remind everybody, the drummer in the greatest
Uh-oh.
band in Western
I'm
Maryland
waiting for my drummer to show up
history
right now.
between 1997 and 1999. Mama's
Uh-oh.
Biscuits. We as a band were big fans of course, James Marshall Hendrix, and covered a number of his tracks. So when I first heard about our next guest, I was definitely intrigued, and I'm very glad we were able, through the good help of our I Mix What I Like staff. The good sister Aaliyah and brother Josh got arranged our next guest, who is, among other things, a licensed clinical psychologist practicing in the areas of neuropsychology, health psychology, and general clinical psychology for over 25 years. He treats multicultural populations with medical and non-medical diagnoses in the South Miami area in both a hospital-based practice and an outpatient setting. He facilitated the Shock the System radio program for a number of years, providing psychosocial analysis and anti-capitalist humanist critique of political, cultural, and economic trends, events of the day. Currently, he is an adjunct instructor at Florida Atlantic University, Fort Lauderdale campus, teaching in the psychology department. Among the topics he has lectured on and written about is the music and cultural significance of Jimi Hendrix and his particular relevance to Black liberation and national culture. So we want to welcome to the program Dr. James Nadell. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, just call me Jim.
Jim. Well,
Yeah.
all right, Jim. Welcome, Jim. Appreciate you joining us. I cannot lie and say that I understood everything I was looking at in the slides you provided us in advance of the show, but they certainly look fascinating. So let me let you just introduce your approach and what your work is saying, and then as you like and as we can work in, I'm happy to pull up any of the slides that we can show. But anyway, welcome, and please lay out your work on Jimi Hendrix.
Sure. Well, first, bit of a preamble, briefly. Appreciate your appreciation, Mr. Kaba. I've also been able to be exposed to your work. I greatly appreciate the work you're doing. You mix what we like. Keep that in mind. It's not just what you like.
Right
if
on.
you like it, we like it. So keep mixing, my man, if you would.
All right.
Okay. I don't want to touch on a sore spot at all. I have been also fortunate enough to get a lot of exposure to Dhoruba bin Wahad's analysis and critique and just overall body of humanism, if you will. And he pointed out, and I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was surprised and very pleased when he acknowledged Jimi Hendrix as a figure that would have been a strong, I guess, segue or a point of connection between radical white youth and Black liberation efforts and movements at the time. And he was aware, I guess, at that time, having lived it, of Hendrix's cultural significance. And so I was really pleased, as well as political and economic, if you dig even deeper and look at his overall body of work in terms of institution building and where he was really going. Because heretofore, the analysis has been almost non-existent. I don't want to give anyone short shrift, and there has been an effort, I think, ever since Jimi Hendrix was performing and thereafter, to sort of bring him black, if you will, quoting Juma Sultan, who was a percussionist and a conga player with Jimi and part of his inner circle and part of a support system that was far too often lacking throughout his career. But Juma Sultan, the Aleem brothers, also known as the Allen brothers, the Ghetto Fighters, they were vocalists on a lot of Jimi's later work. They took him in when he was a nobody and had nothing other than his genius and his talent and his persona and his way of being. And they took him in and nurtured him and helped him develop. And he returned to them, of course. And they were part of his inner circle throughout his life. Their critique and their analysis, while incorporated it's marginalized for the most part. But authors like Corey Washington, who put a book together called Nobody Cages Me, he's also been instrumental in trying to bring Jimmy Black, if you will, because
if I can, you raise an important point, because for most of us, we were introduced to Jimi Hendrix, and even I remember growing up, there was this stereotype was, well, he's a black dude, but he's in the white rock world, and it was like when he wasn't thought of as a black artist. And for me, it wasn't until I read Ricky Vincent's book on funk.
Yes.
That I was really introduced, and I know there's others. You mentioned one already, but just in terms of what I've read, that showed me that I didn't know that Jimmy came out of the black music tradition.
Yes. Well,
that he played. Anyway, please, go ahead. Yeah,
because even at another level, just consider this, all right? Because again, as I say, the analytical assessments have been really inadequate. But as I said, there have been efforts, Ernie Isley, among others, many people, Soul Patrol, if you're familiar with that internet broadcast, there's definitely an effort, and musicians have always been aware of Jimmy. Miles Davis in 1969 was quoted as saying, "The three people I'm listening to, James Brown, Sly Stone, and Jimi Hendrix." And it's not for no reason at all. But just consider it from a psychosocial perspective. What is Jimmy thrust into? First of all, his hard wiring, clearly a highly sensitive individual. He's thrust into a working class African-American social, economic, and political milieu. He comes out of the black working class in the context of a broader multicultural environment in Seattle. So his core comes out of that black working class experience. His father was a gardener. His mother was very young when he was born. He had a lot of family instability. He was often placed in other homes, but he had that extended black family system as well that provided nurturing for him and literally helped him sustain himself to survive. So he came up hard, he came up poor, he came up black working class. He had Native American heritage as well that informed him. And what I think is such a great thing about Hendrix is that while he was coming out of that black working class psychosocial milieu, including the black church, those are his first musical memories. And I would be, I guess it would be unfair of me to not acknowledge David Henderson's book, Voodoo Child of the Aquarian Age, which, though a biography, and there have been many excellent biographies and interesting ones, though a biography, David Henderson is steeped in Black American culture and Black liberation culture, and he's a fine writer. So he is sensitive to these nuances. And he talks about Jimmy and Jimmy's family background and what he emerged out of, and that deep connection he had to Black people and Black culture and all people. It's not one or the other. It's not dichotomous. There's individual dimensions, there's ethno-cultural group factors, and then there's universal human factors that comprise this man as he evolved over time. So he's coming out of that Black working class experience with other diverse influences, especially in music. His father's a saxophone player, amateur, his mother's a dancer. He hears music all the time, gospel, blues, jazz. However, he's also, post-World War II, exposed to Elvis Presley. Not just Elvis's music, which, let's be fair, Elvis is playing in a Black idiom. So
he's playing Black music. He was playing stolen Black music.
I've seen it interpreted that way. I think it's a little more nuanced than that because Elvis himself was stolen from, in a sense. And Elvis had good relationships with people like Jackie Wilson, who acknowledged Elvis. So I initially had a similar response as you do, but I think it's a little more complex than that. And culture ebbs and flows a bit more than that. But I wouldn't say that's a gross mischaracterization. I would say there's a lot of validity to that. And it's not about Elvis as an individual. It's about an economic, political, and cultural matrix that creates a need for an Elvis and then exploits that need, and what are the material outcomes and impacts on other artists and the originators and the pioneers and people who are of equal talent or greater talent than Elvis. But Jimi was magnetized by Elvis, not alone because of his musical presentation, but the way he energized people. So he drew from a lot of influences, is my point. And so it's not dichotomous, you know, black, white. We understand that that term has no genetic validity, but it has tremendous political, economic, cultural, and social meaning and power in material terms. But heretofore, the treatment and the analysis of Hendrix has really, I think, can be characterized by a lot of, you know, by the term cultural imperialism. First of all, as you said, he's treated as white music, as if there's such a strict separation. Because what we call white music in America, most of white pop music, is steeped in Black American music. Gospel, blues, jazz, R&B, soul, take your pick. You know that.
No, but I know that I just know that and so a couple things just quickly, and then I definitely want to ask you specifically about your work and the presentation you sent. But so, like I remember, you know, I remember vividly where I was too, floating in the middle of the Red Sea, and I had gotten a box set of the called Stages. And on that compilation had a version of Jimi playing the Star Spangled Banner, which people usually thought was just a rock and roll tribute that is still copied to this day when people perform it live they think they're paying tribute to Jimi. But it was a complete condemnation and critique. And at one point, he actually in this version in particular, when he plays the line "Land of the Free," you hear him say, "Yeah, right." And then he, you know, so that was, you know, that I remember that being a sort of like a bookmark.
The light went on. The light went on for you. You saw.
And then I started to look into more, and as I read and listened more, but my point really is he made a conscious effort to reach Black and brown audiences. He lamented that the genreification of his work kept Black and brown people away. He lamented his own the way he was being promoted. He felt that he tried to reach out to the Panther Party. He tried to make homage to dedicated Voodoo Child to them and all that kind of stuff.
Yes,
and then, as you note in your work, he had for a time has this all Black power trio.
Yes, and
the Band of Gypsies.
They were not just a Black power trio; they were a Black power trio.
That's right. So just quickly, because not every so Jim, not everybody watching can appreciate from the perspective I have as the drummer of Western Maryland's best funk band in between 1997 and 1999. But a power trio, just so everybody understands, is a guitarist, a bassist, and a drummer. And you
can only pull that off if your guitarist is someone like Jimi Hendrix, who shows up in England, asks to sit in with Cream. Eric Clapton has to leave the stage when Jimi is laying down Killing Floor, the Howlin' Wolf classic. Clapton retreats to the dressing room. Chas Chandler has to steady his hand because Clapton can't even light his own cigarette because of the force of nature he was just exposed to. And he said to Chas Chandler, "You told me he was good. You didn't tell me he was that effing good." But let me sort of respond to what you said, because you make an excellent point. And part of the problem, again, is the corrupted, tarnished, again, cultural imperialism comes to mind. The way that Jimi was positioned, marketed, literally managed, exploited. It's really never, I think, adequately been delved into. And just as you talk about how Malcolm and Martin are monetized, and every nook and cranny of life is subject to being commercially exploited and having its substance removed, as if it's like, to turn out a piece of Wonder Bread that has no core, that has no germ, that has no vital properties. The same was often done to Hendrix, both, I think, just sort of inadvertently and also on a conscious basis. But he became aware of all that. But look at where this man's coming from, okay? His initial career, he is performing with local bands on the R&B circuit in Seattle. He joins the army, where he does nothing with his free time but play guitar with his longtime friend Bill Cox, who later becomes his bass player when he needs a harder, funkier foundation. But Jimi's playing with the Isley Brothers. He's playing with Wilson Pickett. He lived with the Isley Brothers. They were so astounded by this man's talent, as Ernie Isley described it. They took him into their home in Teaneck, New Jersey, housed him, fed him, bought him his Stratocaster, literally bought him his strings. When they saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, they looked at each other. They were in their living room watching on TV. Imagine this scene in Teaneck, New Jersey, beautiful town, by the way. He's sitting there with the Isleys. Ernie Isley's about all of 11 or 12 years old. They look at each other, and they're like, "Uh-oh, something's coming," because they knew that while schlock music, the synthesis that Dick Clark provided to kind of steer people away from a harder, roots-based form of rock and roll music, that couldn't do it. But the Beatles were superior talent with something new, and they had taken roots music and added something to it and synthesized and created what I like to refer to as the white synthesis, just as other bands like Cream did, just as Elvis did. These are legitimate expressions of roots music. The way they're positioned, the lack of credit provided to the originators, that's a separate issue. But just looking at how the culture kind of ebbs and flows. So they looked at each other and they said, "Uh-oh, what's going to happen now?" And then one of the brothers said, "Well, they got two guitarists, but I think we're going to be all right because we got Jimi." But his tenure with the Isley was short-lived, but they let him stretch out. People like Little Richard, some of the R&B acts where the lead singer was the main focus. The guitar was just to provide backup, Guitar, in fact, I think I heard Chuck D talk about in one of his songs how Black people abandoned guitar and lead guitar. Like, as Nelson George points out, again, not to be critical, but just to observe, culturally speaking, in terms of music, it's always changing so quickly, older forms are abandoned. So Jimi is seen as playing kind of an older form of music, blues, but it's so futuristic that it's hard to comprehend. White America couldn't comprehend it, and even Black America at the time, providing the cutting edge sounds that provided the basis for the next jump in terms of white artists who really stretched out, which then later influenced the Black sound, no question. Look at the Temptations in 1968, and then after Jimi breaks onto the scene, the way they dress, the sound, the use of the wah-wah pedal, multi-tracking, all of that. Hendrix was the lead. He wasn't. It's not where he wasn't where Black music was going. It's where he was taking it. This man should be spoken of in my estimation in the same breath as John Coltrane, Miles Davis, the saxophone colossus, Dexter Gordon.
There's no doubt about that.
Dexter Gordon, Billie Holiday, people of that sort. So he's coming. I mean, there's not one R&B lick that this man couldn't play backwards, forwards, in his sleep, awake.
Well, that's the one part, if I can, that's the one part I wanted to emphasize about the power trio, to your point, that when you said you needed to have a guitarist like Jimi to get away with it. And the reason for that specifically is that you have to have somebody that can play rhythm guitar and lead.
And bass.
And bass, yes.
And sing. And the man is writing his own songs. You see,
and playing and a left-handed guitar is playing a right-handed guitar strung backwards and upside down. That's just so this is so dope.
Yeah, well,
like the dude, and I agree with you that in terms of how he should be spoken of. But because I don't want to, the hour can go by very quickly, and I want to make sure we get to the specifics of your work.
Sure, yes, I'm sorry, but it's the problem is built in.
It's my fault.
The problem is built in because he is such a figure who, and there's such a, like, what would you call it, a paucity of real critical analysis. And when there is, it's so steeped in cultural imperialism and narrow definitions of this thing we call Blackness. Again, no genetic basis, but very significant economic, political, cultural, relevance and salience. It's problematic. even like reading Nelson George's book, The Death of Rhythm and Blues, he gives really short shrift to Jimi. You mentioned Ricky Vincent. I had him on my program back a few years ago, and we had a lengthy discussion about Hendrix. So musicians know, but it's percolating. When I expose the young people in my classes to Hendrix's music and I put it in context, they see it right away because they're not hindered by the tarnished, corrupted presentation of the time, and also the weak analysis that followed, in the wake of his short but voluminous career. But he's definitely coming out of roots music, but he's not afraid of white people. And why should he be? He's open to all influences, but what's the core? Where's he coming out of? What are the things he internalized? This is a highly sensitive, literally genius person. I mean, look what he does in the studio, for example. Think about from a neurocognitive, neurolinguistic perspective, what the man is doing, okay? When they had 16 tracks, he's laying down the rhythm guitar track, okay? He has a whole idea of what the song is going to be. Then he's laying down a lead that has to relate to that rhythm, okay? And to the entire body of work. Then he has to lay down another lead that has to relate to all the other pieces. Okay, the simultaneity of attention, the executive functioning, the prefrontal lobe kind of development that takes is uncanny. That's why I speak of him like a Coltrane, except Jimi had electricity and a wah-wah pedal, and he had multiple tracking, and he also was influenced by the hallucinogenic substances that he was ingesting. However, lots of people took hallucinogens. Nobody did what he was doing. And that's another aspect of the career. There's so much there, but you want to distill down to how this relates to Black national culture and Black liberation culture and such.
Well, I wanted you to quickly outline what you mean when you title your work a psychodynamic reassessment of Jimi Hendrix.
Sure.
And then there are what you mentioned, at least passingly in your presentation, or have highlighted in your presentation. There are a couple of points I do want you to touch on, specifically that Band of Gypsies moment and the post Band of Gypsies moment, and what you have to say about his death or assassination.
Okay. All right. I can't speak in too much depth about his assassination because I have not really researched it thoroughly.
Okay.
But it absolutely should be researched thoroughly by a good investigative journalist. And I have a colleague I may be able to refer you to who you might be able to interview on that subject matter.
Sure. No, I mean, there's a couple of things I've seen that are very interesting, and you at least, I mean, because you describe, I think you used the word alleged.
Right. Yes. I mean, I tend to be cautious. I tend to be cautious about, saying something definitively, but in a certain context, I have no problem seeing that as a scenario whatsoever. But the trail is cold, and there's not a lot of people who come forward. But that I'm going a bit far afield. In terms of the psychosocial analysis, most of the biographical material is very rich. You get a lot of information, feedback from family members, etc. It's nuanced, it's detailed, but nobody really puts it in any sort of theoretical context. And for example, when you look at someone like Hendrix, the Freudian concept of sublimation, how do we channel aggression, sexual energy, the frustrations of economic, political, and interpersonal conditions? We can't very well engage in aggressive behavior towards others, although we do when we cannot regulate it or when the conditions become so extreme. So we have to channel these energies. What better interpretation of someone like Jimi Hendrix? Look at the kind of emotional intensity that he pours into his work. Freud has a construct that he terms cathexis. Catharsis is the release of energy. We see that abundantly in Jimi's playing. Cathexis is the amount of energy you invest in something. This man invested heart and soul. Okay, they say Robert Johnson sold his soul to the devil to accumulate his great talent. I mean, he became so good so fast, the mythology attributed that greatness to selling his soul to the devil at the crossroads, okay? Hendrix did not have to sell his soul. He gave it willingly. He completely submitted to the entities of music. If I can borrow from the Allen twins, the Aleem brothers, the Ghetto Fighters, I believe in always referencing originators. And they talked about Jimi's relationship to the entities of music. And mind you, I'm an agnostic. I don't have any religious affiliation whatsoever. I'm a wayward member of my tribe, but I have no religious affiliation. However, you know, when you see what this man is doing, there's something beyond just like the material. And I find that hard to wrestle with. And so I would just say, you know, that when you're looking in the kind of intense like energy investment, as I said, he was the hardest working man in music. James Brown was the hardest working man in show business. Jimi was the hardest working man in music. Literally would fall asleep with his guitar across his body. Okay, the entities loved him right back, is my point, as the Allen twins point out. His greatness was not natural, as it were. He had the hard wiring, he had the massive hands, he had the ear, he had the emotional sensitivity, in part acquired psychosocially, not genetically, the software of his experiences as a Black working class person. But he is channeling that like degree of energy and releasing that degree of energy. So from a Freudian perspective, we get much insight. Adler, another great psychoanalyst, he was Freud's psychoanalyst. He was the heir apparent until he broke with the master over issues of the emphasis on sexuality and aggression versus our social nature. Adler talks about the inferiority complex and striving for superiority. Hendrix came from very humble beginnings. He suffered a lot of rejection because he was so far ahead of his time, but he always persevered, kept going. He had that intense belief in his own talent. Although very humble and shy interpersonally, he came to understand who he was, and the entities loved him right back. So he gave his soul willingly, and they loved him back. And the outcome, the product, we see before us. There's so many other great psychoanalytic minds whose constructs and theoretical, advances we can apply to really understand who this man was. And part of that, and I've never seen this done, part of that would be to include the great psychoanalyst Frantz Fanon. You know, I love the fact that you have guests that talk about Fanon on your program, and you do it very much from a holistic perspective in terms of issues of violence, culture, economics, politics. He's right along with the great minds, known as the Black Freud, if you will. What he says when he talks about national culture, when you look at that and you interpret Hendrix's music through that prism, I think you get a lot of insights and you get a much different perspective and vantage point. And what you see happening over the course of Jimi's career, as I interpret it, is that he breaks out, he's this massive talent, all kinds of ideas, creative impulses in the mind of this 24-year-old. The rate of growth every year, I mean, just look at his aesthetic presentation and his sound from 1966, 67, 68, 69 into 70. You're talking about 4 full years when he's a feature artist. The growth from Are You Experienced to some of the posthumous releases that came out as Cry of Love, War Heroes, and Rainbow Bridge, the multi-tracking. What you can do now, actually, when it's not taken off, of course, and removed, you can reference the isolated tracks and hear what this man is doing and the hard funk genre that he is literally creating, because he has to break out of the R&B scene. It's too narrow. It's restricting him. It cannot cage him, again, to quote Corey Washington. That doesn't mean he's not taking it all with him. He has to break through the stasis. He has to take it to the next level. And that's exactly what he does. His songwriting on Are You Experienced? I mean, for a 24-year-old guy, you know, even the social consciousness then, if you listen to a song like I Don't Live Today, which is basically acknowledging the plight of the American Indian, read the words to that song. I don't live today. I mean, he's talking about the condition of the Native American population in colonial United States. But as he goes further along, songs like on Axis Bold as Love, Up From the Skies. He says, I have lived here before the days of ice, and that is why I'm so concerned when I come back to find the smell of a world that has burned and the stars misplaced. He's talking about the world. He does a song on Electric Ladyland, his next jump up, double album. What black artist does a double album, concept album in 1968, other than jazz artists? Okay, Hendrix was embracing all of it. Okay, you cannot cage him, you cannot categorize him, but at the core is that roots music. And furthermore, this is a man who's brilliant, sensitive to what's going on around him. He internalizes it and he recreates it in his music. What is the major or among the major issue going on for this man, both around him and in his lived experience? Because when Jimi Hendrix floats through the world, he's not floating through it, as somebody like Molly Ringwald. He's failing the brown paper bag test, my man. Okay, when he's living in the South, okay, or touring in the South, he's riding up front with the limo driver. You know why? What do you think's going to happen if they see some black dude riding in the back of a limo in a southern town in 1968? Okay. In 1968, on April 6th, I believe it was, 2 days after MLK was assassinated, Jimi was slated to do a concert in Newark, New Jersey. They were rioting in Newark. It was not exactly, safe environment. He said, no, I'll do it. The limo driver said, I'm not going unless Jimi sits up front with me, which is exactly what he did. So he went, he played one song. He said, this is for a friend. And everybody knew who he was talking about. And he laid down a 30-minute instrumental. And as legend has it, these old grizzled white supremacist, old school redneck type, stagehands, these guys were like crying. Okay, this is the kind of power the man had. Listen to the song House Burning Down. He wrote that when he was in Los Angeles at the time of the 1964-65 Watts riots. He wrote that song in response to that. Read the words to that song. Heavy, man. He is one of the original Afrofuturists. I mean, I'm an average mind, my friend, okay? There's got to be a brilliant person out there who can really do justice to this man's body of work. You can look at it from so many different angles. But you asked about that transition, and you talked about
because I do want to ask you specifically, like you have on one of your slides here, you talk about what you describe as the short-lived band of gypsies, and you have here rumored drugged by management, sabotages experimental Black Power trio. So that's kind of what I wanted you to talk a few minutes about. Sure. What was going on with the band of gypsies? Why was it short-lived? What is with the rumored of the drugged by and sabotaged by management and
okay. And again, I underscore rumored because that's not exactly something that somebody is going to film with their cell phone back in the day. Look at it in these terms, as I've heard others describe it. Hendrix was the highest paid individual artist on the entire scene of music, popular music scene at that time. He could command 100, 125K for any performance. So you've got him with these two English guys. He's sort of cast as this kind of apolitical black hippie, but they don't even mention the black part, and he sees that, he recognizes that. And as you noted, that troubles him. So both from that sense of things and just the evolution of his own music, he's going in a different direction. The demarcation point for me, again, this is oversimplified, but in the winter of 1968 and January of 69, he's doing a tour of Europe with The Experience. You can see he's looking kind of worn, but his sound has really developed greatly in a couple of years. But you can see he's not comfortable with that same Jimi Hendrix experience. And it has nothing to do with the race of his colleagues, because he later brings Mitch Mitchell back as his drummer. But he's just not getting the sound he really wants. And he's always changing. He's always evolving. So he returns to the United States. You can look at the physical difference in the man. He changes his entire aesthetic by the spring of 69. In the spring of 69, he brings Buddy Miles, of Electric Flag and Buddy Miles Express fame, who's a great guitarist in his own right, great singer, steeped in gospel and soul music. And he brings his old Army friend, Bill Cox, back to him. People that he knew and cared about him before he made it. But that was incidental. He also needed.
Wait a minute. Did you say Buddy Miles played guitar?
Buddy Miles,
well as drums.
Them Changes is Buddy Miles' song, and he plays guitar on the studio version of that song. He's a fantastic.
I knew it was his song, and I knew he sang while he played drums. I didn't know he played guitar.
He's a cement mixer drummer, as Mitch Mitchell refers to him, and he's a gospel steeped vocalist, and he was a good fit for Jimi by the spring of '69. So Jimi is actually in the studio developing songs like Power of Soul, Message of Love, all those songs that are going to directly relate not just to Black people, because Jimi was a universalist, but it had particular relevance and salience. Because the mark to me of a great artist and lyricist is somebody who can capture a universal reality on some level, the ethno-cultural specificity, if it's relevant, and also they have their own individual stamp and their own personal life experience. And Jimi is constantly floating between those three spheres effortlessly, like just with fluidity, and utter grace. Read his lyrics, listen to the music, what he's doing. And so he's got the band of gypsies that he's working with behind the scenes, and he's finishing his tour with The Experience. Why? So he can clear big cash. Why? So he can build his own studio, Electric Lady Studios, where he can own himself, where he can develop other artists who have nothing like he did when he came up. So they can avoid the exploitive relationships with the music plantation, as I like to call it, that he was mired in, due in part to the relationship with his management. So think about, he's transitioning. In the summer of '69, he goes up to an area close to Woodstock, New York, in upstate New York, where he has a house rented for him by his manager, but that just means rented for him with his money by his manager. And he brings a cadre of musicians and close friends there, where he groups together with Billy Cox, Juma Sultan. Juma Sultan had a collective in upstate New York. It was called the Aboriginal Music Society. He's an outstanding conga player. You can hear him on songs like Dolly Dagger, Freedom, Straight Ahead. Jimi was incorporating that fuller sound, including clearly, that African root. He wanted that sound in his music, and he brought it in. So the summer of '69, Mitch Mitchell describes it. Eric Barrett, who was one of his his handlers, his roadies, said there was a very weird atmosphere. Well, weird to a white English guy, but very comfortable and appropriate for somebody like Hendrix, who needs a support system around him. So it wasn't like a conscious thing. These people are Black, let me bring them in. It's organic, man. These are the people he knows. These are the people who he communicates with culturally and musically. Nobody's excluded with him, but he really is making a conscious effort to be true to his sound and with a broader awareness and consciousness. So out of that unit comes the Woodstock performance. And that was just too big of an ensemble. They even covered Gypsy Woman and Aware of Love at Woodstock, the Great Impression songs. So his repertoire is expanding. His writing is becoming really much more politically conscious. That's the summer where he puts together Machine Gun. You mentioned the Star Spangled Banner. What are those wails? What are those cries? What are those sounds? Yeah, of course, bombs going off, the suffering of war. Well, where is another war going on, my man? What's another war happening? And you talk about the prisoners of war as you describe them, which, by the way, is a very bold way of looking at it. And when you talk about political prisoners, because I don't see any so-called Black media figures who talks about the Black political prisoners locked away, alum of the BPP and the BLA. Who talks about it? You do. Where are they? Where are these people, man? James Baldwin said something very telling a while back. And he was telling white America, I have a secret. I have a secret about Black people that I want you to know. And everybody's expecting some sort of bomb to drop. You know what he says? The most common sense thing in the world. We're just like you. We want the same things you do. Malcolm X said the same thing. You want to know what I'll do? Think about what you would do. I'll do the same thing and I'll do more of it. So getting back on point though, you see this man moving in a direction consciously and organically to own himself, to set up his own institution. This guy has $300,000 in the bank when he dies, the proceeds of his last 3 shows. That's it. Millions of dollars. You know, the guy was getting exploited ruthlessly. And it's not that white artists don't get exploited, but there's kind of a hierarchy on the music plantation. And let's face it, because of the overall position of Black people relative to the means of production in the United States, who is going to be super exploited? You know, Eric Clapton got ripped off terribly. Tommy James literally was managed by Morris Levy, the so-called godfather of the music industry. He got ripped off horrendously, but it was super exploitation. And whatever is visited upon white people in terms of oppression, as you know, my man, you're getting the worst of it. You're getting worse. Whatever happens to Black people is going to happen to white people. But coming back on point, I'm sorry, I'm going far.
But just specifically, because I know we only got a couple minutes left. Specifically, right. I wanted you to say something about what do you mean when you talk about the band of gypsies being sabotaged?
Yes. Okay. Think about the threat that is. Hendrix, cash cow, 2 white musicians, wham. Suddenly, 2 Black guys playing a rhythm and blues-based music with revolutionary messages such as Machine Gun, Isabella, Message of Love, Power of Soul. Very threatening. The sad thing is that Hendrix would have been a huge success no matter what he did, but he didn't need that management. So apparently, as rumor has it, it's hard to know, he definitely was drugged with some hallucinogen, and he got sick. And he had to walk off. It was an anti-war concert, a Vietnam War moratorium show on January 28th, 1970, a month after the triumphant Band of Gypsies show. And that squashed it. But I think that Buddy Miles would always have been in the orbit, but Hendrix needed a little more of a jazz flavor. So I think that kind of culminated, you know, that show sort of just forced him in that direction where he might have been going anyway, but he would have done it on his own terms. And he maintained a friendship with Buddy Miles, and Buddy still played with him in the studio. His manager, of course, was very much known to be, I mean, this is found throughout all the biographies about Jimi, very well connected, if not a member of organized crime in England. Someone who was a member of British intelligence and also was in the British military. Hendrix was his only property. I just have to plug in, man. I'm about to run out of power.
Yeah, and in fact, that's something I'm struggling with.
I went far afield, but I guess my overall, to pull it together, you know, some takeaways. This man is an individual. He is a universalist, but he's very much steeped in Black American musical culture and Black liberation culture. 1969, Newport, introducing Voodoo Child. I don't know where this comes from. The man literally jumps up and says, "This is a Black militant song, and don't you ever forget it." He would introduce Voodoo Child in 1970 as the Black Panther national anthem. He didn't take anybody's line. He was always an independent thinker, but he was right in line and right in league with all of that and all of what was going on. It's time to bring Jimi Black, you know, for the sake of just having an accurate assessment and analysis of this genius figure, because he's acknowledged as a genius now, and he's not tarnished as badly as he was, but he is completely amputated from the roots musical culture and just Black liberation culture. And he is very much right in the heart of it. He's an Afrofuturist, man. He's going back to the slave ship and he's taking it to the spaceship and beyond. Listen to Machine Gun. Listen to Polygap. Listen to that 1970 work. This man has 16 tracks to work with. He is, neurocognitively speaking, the most uncanny person I've ever seen. Remember, Coltrane had a saxophone, no amplification, no electricity. Imagine if he had those tools. Hendrix is Coltrane with a guitar, man. Coltrane is the father of music. Billie Holiday is the mother. Jimi is the son of music. And Bob Marley is the Holy Ghost, spreading the message to the four corners of the earth, my man. That's my theology of roots music.
Can't think of a better way to wrap it than that. Jim, Professor Nadell, appreciate you coming through and sharing this
your
work.
Appreciation. I love your program.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
How come you have 100 viewers, man? My point was about Baldwin. You are just like everybody else. Why be like us, man? Please. Why don't your people listen? Not your people. You know what I'm saying, man. Why don't people listen to your program, man? You're funny. You're glib. You get great guests. Who gets Daruba bin Wahad? Who has more insight than he does? You bring him to us. What's up with that, man? You got to be heard, brother. You do a great show. My house does not get cleaned without you in my earphones.
No, keep going.
No, seriously. You need to be platformed. How come you don't do terrestrial radio? Getting oppositional white supremacist views on there. You're able to argue with people, my man.
I'm not interested. People. No, I'm not. I'm definitely not interested in that.
No, but these people. No, I'm saying what? I'm saying the rest of the country needs to hear you. You're parochial, man. You need to be heard. There is hunger for that kind of contradiction. People want to hear that. Everything is bland. It's hideous, man. They want something real and organic, what you bring. You know how to interview people you disagree with. You're not afraid of disagreements. You crush those Bitcoin guys, man. I don't even understand what that stuff is. My head starts spinning. Okay? You break it down. You are so underutilized and underappreciated. Seriously. Look, man, I'm here in Miami, okay? Everyone thinks Miami's a hip town, really cool, cutting edge. I'm in the middle, okay? To one side of me, I have reactionary, quasi-fascist, Cuban exile capitalists who dominate the political discourse and the media discourse all too often. And on the other side, I have reactionary, Palestinian are cockroaches, rabid Zionist types. My God, man.
Sounds like a good time. You're in a good spot. Sounds like a great place to be.
Yeah.
Listen, no, seriously.
You saved me, man. You need to be heard. Get out there. You got a good voice. Get on terrestrial radio, man. Get on more platforms. You need to be heard.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. This is hilarious on so many different levels. Listen, keep up the good work. I definitely want to learn more and get more into what you've done and talk again, because Jimi Hendrix is one of my favorite.
Unknown, well-known, brother. He released an album.
Right on.
He released an album called Unknown. Well, after his death, of course, it was
right.
He didn't release anything. It was called Unknown, Well-Known. That's him. He's the unknown, well-known. Everybody knows who he is, but nobody knows him. That's changing, though. The paradigm is shifting. You're helping.
All right, right on. All right, well, listen, everybody. Look,
left on, my man. Left on, not right on. Left on, brother. Left on,
everybody. We're gonna move on because we do have to get to our next guest before my computer completely dies. So again, I appreciate you coming through. Thanks a lot for your work.
Thank you, man.
And everybody stick around. No, it's all good. It was great. It's fantastic. It was
fragmented.
No, it's a very Jimi Hendrix-like conversation, so it's perfect. So we're going to take a quick break and come back with Barrett Brown and get into some of this Joe Rogan stuff. Thanks again, Professor Nadell.
Thank you for your time. Jim, by all means.
Jim. Thanks, Jim. All right, peace.
All right, man.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
All right, everybody, back here at I Mix What I Like, BPM. I'm Jared Ball, and joining us once again is Barrett Brown. Actually white, though. Anyway, this guy, so I don't know. I don't have a proper biography, admittedly, in front of me, but Barrett is a longtime journalist, activist, reporter extraordinaire, especially on issues of the state and the internet and the interwebs. He's also a political prisoner, former political prisoner who was locked up for this work. So we always appreciate that kind of stuff. And I certainly appreciate the work that you've done. I've learned a lot over the years. So it's good to talk with you again, Barrett Brown. Welcome back to the program. Thanks again for joining us. Good morning to you, or good afternoon.
Thank you for having me. I wish I had a third of that last guy's energy.
Yeah, right. I know, right? That was great.
How do people maintain that pace in life? Who was that? What the hell was that?
Jim Nadell is a among other things is a psycho. I don't know what was he. I read the title. I'll tell you exactly. He is a psychologist and who practices in areas of psychology, health psychology, and clinical psychology. And he's done a lot of work on Jimi Hendrix and the psychodynamics of Jimi Hendrix. So that's what we were talking about.
Wow. All right. Well, that's
no, it's fascinating. So we get a chance to go back and check that. But listen, my computer is not cooperating as usual, and every workaround I think I develop fails. So let's at least get started and get to as much as we can, because when you reached out, look, there's so much to it. Initially, the context was Joe Rogan, who has been making a lot of news again for his racist comments, for the censorship issues, for his issues with Spotify and the But you reached out and said you had a whole different perspective on this, and what little you've shared with me and what little I've been able to read in your memoir, what you sent, and I honestly didn't get to it as much as I need to, so we'll have to have you back again at some point to talk more about that. But there's so much more to this Joe Rogan thing. Then we see the invitation or the symbolic invitation from Peter Thiel and Rumble to buy him, to bring him over, to give him $100 million, and then from there it goes in a whole wild direction. So
yes, it does. It does indeed.
Please lay out for us as much as you can in as I guess simple a way as possible. What is the significance of Peter Thiel's expression of solidarity with Joe Rogan? And maybe talk as much as you can about Peter Thiel, his relationship, and of course to this Palantir group that you have so much experience with.
So the Joe Rogan element here. I'm interested in Joe Rogan to the extent that the Allies were interested in Normandy. I'm just trying to get to Germany. Rogan he's one of a number of people like Tim Pool who have been used by a network that extends around Peter Thiel, the founder of Palantir. Palantir is one of the company that has acquired over the years a tremendous, and in some cases almost unprecedented amount of power in the West. It is an information firm that provides very valuable services to the intelligence community, police, corporations. Both political parties in 2016 in the U.S. Tried to get Palantir to do to work for them. Trump is the one that got them because Trump is the one that Palantir's Peter Thiel wanted in power. And he
just announced that and Thiel just announced that he left Facebook, where he also was affiliated, to go work specifically directly with Trump again, to promote him and associated politics. And of course, some might recognize Peter Thiel's name for his association with PayPal and Tesla, but not so much with Palantir. Is the point I'm really getting at. Sorry for the interruption. Go ahead.
Oh no problem. That needs to be said. So. Rogan, obviously the talk had been about Rogan doing things like using the N-word in kind of whatever context to discuss it. I haven't seen those clips. Didn't care about them. The more legitimate I think, issue, like the more like harder to dismiss issue, was him having on guys, sort of race scientists, or actually people who weren't scientists but who were espousing modern iterations of race science, incorrect science in each of these cases. You had a guy on saying that there was a gene that that blacks had, just blacks, that predisposes you to violence, and of course that's not the case. That's a gene that's prevalent across ethnic groups. Anyway, the real issue with Rogan is that he has, for at least since at least 2017, has been a major piece of Peter Thiel's multifaceted, multidimensional army, which he uses to further a philosophy that he calls Dark Enlightenment. The Dark Enlightenment, which is still a term that's not very well known, in Thiel's own words, in the words of other of its espousers, if that's a word, is an anti-democratic, sort of neo-reactionary or neoconservative, technocratic. I don't want to put words in their mouths, so I'll just leave it at that. It is something that people should look up because it is dangerous, and because it has a great amount of appeal, a great deal of appeal to a certain kind of person, the kind of person who's kind of intelligent, the kind of person who is kind of astute, the sort of person who sees like problems with democracy, and can then be led down a narrow path that doesn't necessarily follow. Technicians, cops, huge amounts of the current white culture in the U.S. Have already, through the alt-right and different venues, like different channels, whether it be Tim Pool or Joe Rogan or all the other alt-right figures that popped up in the last 7 or 8 years, have been drawn into its ethos. And it's the greatest challenge that we will confront as a civilization, politically, in the foreseeable future. Trump is a result of the Dark Enlightenment through Thiel. So Rogan, more specifically, has been a creature of Peter Thiel since, like I said, 2017. And I didn't understand this until this new Joe Rogan thing happened, this whole controversy, because I don't really care about Joe Rogan. I don't watch any podcasts. But I happened to see, someone sent me the other day during this controversy, a tweet by Andy No. Now, Andy No is a guy who got his start by being heavily entrenched in Proud Boys and Patriot Prayer groups, militant groups, which he supported. In fact, he was caught supporting them, which is what led to. Let me put it this way: a couple of years ago, Andy No accompanied a Patriot Prayer group meeting. They were meeting to plan an attack on the Cider House riot, which is a left-wing bar in, I think, either Seattle or Portland. I forget. I get those two cities confused because I think they're pretty much the same, aren't they? And he accompanied them, and they attacked, and a woman was left paralyzed on the along the left side. And he characterized the whole thing a certain way, and then a few while later, a video came out showing that Andy No had been involved in this. As in, Andy No was involved in the planning and execution of a violent attack by a white supremacist group. That fact managed to elude a lot of the press. What didn't elude the press, what made every single major outlet for like weeks and weeks a couple years ago was that Andy No had a milkshake thrown at him by an alt-right Antifa, by Antifa or whatever kid, and claimed that milkshake was filled with concrete mix, and then it caused a blood bleeding in his head, that he had brain injuries, which would have really did not pan out over time. Anyway, so Andy No is a con artist, and he's involved in some fascist groups, and we could spend all day explaining all his connections, but let's move on. Andy No tweeted the other day that he owes his career to Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan picked him out and gave him a voice when he was no one, when he had been assaulted by the alt-right. And it's true, and Joe Rogan did, and almost certainly Joe Rogan did so in coordination with the other people that Andy Ngo and Joe Rogan both deal with. That includes Eric Weinstein, head of Thiel Capital, Peter Thiel's capital investment firm, who's also been a guest on Joe Rogan several times, despite being an uninteresting character, and Claire Lamont, who runs Quillette, an outlet that Peter Thiel clearly funds, that Peter Thiel has written op-eds for, and that has run lots of pro-Peter Thiel articles on obscure issues that Peter Thiel, defending Peter Thiel on things that he was upset about. It is one of Peter Thiel's many pieces, game pieces that he's using to move towards what he's going after. Joe Rogan. This is something that's been public. So a lot of these pieces have been public, but not put together for a while, and that's true of so many things that are important these days. In a profile of Claire Lamont in Politico a couple years ago, it starts out with Claire Lamont meets with Eric Weinstein for dinner. Eric Weinstein, Thiel Capital fellow, as well as a couple other people, and Joe Rogan. And they're all part of what Politico describes as the intellectual dark web. That's another more well-known and a little bit more euphemistic term for the dark Enlightenment. So Joe Rogan is connected through all these different links, not just as people he interviews or knows or wants to give a voice to, people he works with and operates with and has dealings with. Almost certainly business dealings in California directly. That we'll get to that next week when we're ready. And so here's the problem with that. Claire Lamont is not just someone who, back in the day before she scrubbed her blog posts, was advocating a thinly disguised version of scientific racism. She's someone who is also, even today in Quillette, has used that outlet to advocate the human biodiversity movement, which is a term that was taken over after after a previous term turned out to be too clearly racist. She runs a lot of writers who talk that they use concepts that were first produced on VDare, the white nationalist site. She is somewhere on the white nationalist spectrum. I don't know where. I don't care where. It doesn't matter for our purposes. You have all of these people, all these connections, and we have a whole list of some of the more suspicious characters that Rogan's had on. None of that would really matter if it weren't for the nature of this network, if it weren't for what it connected to. Atomwaffen, which is one of the most dangerous, white supremacist groups in the world, and I think no longer exists now as such. Which was caught trying to commit assassinations, journalists and other figures a couple years ago. Atomwaffen is directly connected to Andy Ngo through a woman who is a CEO of a firm called Exeintel, Exeintel. I believe I may have sent you, perhaps I didn't, the picture of her doing the Atomwaffen Nazi porn.
Oh yeah, you did.
Yeah, we can. I guess. Let's see. Let me.
The only reason I hesitate to try to pull it up myself is one of the reasons is because my computer is really struggling.
Here's what we'll do.
Let's.
We'll.
What I thought I would do is because you sent it in a signal here. I'll just show it on my phone at least.
Yeah, and so that mask right there, if you ask the Southern Poverty Law Center and or what are any of the other groups or anyone, they can tell you that's an Atomwaffen mask. And that woman's name is Shelley something or other. An article actually came out about her finally in BuzzFeed a few months ago. And about how the firm she ran was also started by the FBI, an FBI agent named Jason Chambers. She's someone that went after us in my group a couple years ago. We, of course, were going after her as well. And she's someone who Andy Ngo was openly espousing as his partner in hunting down Antifa. And there you go in her Atomwaffen mask. That's one of many of the Nazi porn stuff she does on the side. And that's interesting, isn't it? What's also interesting is the 100 other links that Andy Ngo has, and every other individual incident that even in a normal American society, let's say 20 years ago, would have been a problem. There's about 100 of those types of things. That's one of them we just showed you.
Just quickly, when you refer to we in our group, is this Project PM, which I neglected to bring up in your
sort
intro?
of. So it's complicated because I had to shut down all my groups in the last few months, and I'm now working. I'll get into that in a bit, I guess. Well, this is actually a good time to. Well, no, I'll get into it a bit because things are confusing enough as it is. But yes, there are less formal groups now, including some of my old research crew from back in the day, as well as some Black organizations that I'm now working with more and more for reasons I'll explain later on. So yes, there's a bunch of people involved here that have been for years in putting this stuff together. So let's move on to Peter Thiel, because that's really what this is about. Peter Thiel is not just a guy who has racist views or has a philosophy that might be dangerous if put in practice. He is the most important person in the world right now. I've been saying this for 10 years. I was saying it before I went to prison over going after Palantir. I was saying it from prison. I was saying it after prison. And I've said it a number of times. And I won't say it here, just not going to get you in trouble. But my position has always been that this is a person, this is a 1934 Germany kind of thing where a lot can be prevented if we had either A, institutions that worked, or B, people who were willing to do what's necessary. It is a criminal organization of a sort that we have not seen in the modern world. It is a criminal organization that has vast connections with the intelligence community. It gives the intelligence community of the U.S. and other countries very important data processing abilities. It has been caught, by me and some people back in 2011, plotting to go after a number of journalists, labor union leaders, dissidents, activists, and WikiLeaks, and was also caught spying on me and my associates in Anonymous during the Tunisian Revolution, when we some Tunisian nationals and exiles, as well as a bunch of us elsewhere, in early January 2011, were trying to help the uprising succeed. They were spying on us. We recovered their notes during a hack later on. Anyway, and that was that the whole story's been told a number of times. It is it's a firm that back when after getting Trump in office via the Facebook Cambridge Analytica maneuvers that Congress investigated and the FBI investigated and then backed off of for reasons that are understandable if you know the background. In which Mueller investigated and then never mentioned again. Their involvement in that, is indicative. And it's also indicative that after Trump came into office, one of their partners at a firm that is a firm called Archimedes Global that I wrote about from prison in 2013, and that shares an executive with Cambridge Analytica. That executive became one of Trump's White House minister's defense. That's right. It was like Undersecretary for Defense, Middle East. I forgot exactly what it was. Very influential firms. During the Trump administration, when the ICE, this whole thing with ICE began, where they began rounding up in huge numbers Mexican families, immigrant families, suspected immigrant families, it was Palantir that powered this. It was Palantir that was shown to have facilitated this mass roundup. Palantir doesn't just do explicit, anti-democratic, criminal, otherwise questionable activities. It also has a really mainstream, wholesome presence around the world. It controls data for the NHS here in the UK. It does census data in the US and I think also in the UK. It does hundreds of things. It helps run the UN's refugee data collection program. And I want people to keep that in mind when in a second. It has spin-off companies. Anduril is my favorite one because it's staffed by some of the executives that we caught that were most involved in the Themis scandal in 2011, where they were trying to intimidate journalists, to set up activists for crimes. Back during that scandal, Palantir said, "Oh, we found this one or two guys. We didn't know about it. We put them on suspension pending investigation." They were promoted afterwards a few months later, and now they work at Anduril. And Anduril creates drones, among other things, for protecting immigrants, for catching immigrants. So we have a German-born, and with all due respect to Germany, he is a German-born individual of great intelligence, of tremendous ambition, with connections, beyond what a degree of political connection accrued over 10 years that is unprecedented. Again, both parties wanted Palantir in their campaign in 2016. That's not public yet because very few people have gone through those some of the emails that were leaked from Podesta in 2015 or whatever thoroughly. And in those emails, it shows the Hillary Clinton campaign trying to reach out to Palantir. But that wasn't going to happen. Thiel had made his decision. Trump would be in the White House. This is a German-born person who has openly opposed democracy and runs a lot of our democratic institutions. Has been caught attacking our democratic institutions via these companies. He has run things like Joe Rogan that have helped to contribute to the last several years of civil disturbances, as we might call them, in which the far right has managed to do everything from run over people in Charlottesville to break into the Capitol building without quite getting the same degree of scrutiny and oppression as my friends at some of the Black activist groups in the U.S. Have faced, or anything close to what people who work with me have faced. As an aside, a few weeks before January 6th, the FBI had a meeting in California, or in LA, the LA headquarters, which I recently released the audio of because it was secretly recorded by the witness, in which they're investigating me and my associates. Most of them are journalists and researchers who dig into the right wing and the FBI. You can see it on my pinned page on my Twitter feed if anybody wants to learn more about that. What I'm saying is that the environment right now is perfect for Peter Thiel. They have gotten away with tremendous crimes already. And they will get away with more. Because despite all of these things, despite all the sacrifices that have gone into digging into Palantir, and despite the number of times they've been caught, number one, attacking democracy at its very core, elections, press, labor unions, public knowledge, they have on every occasion weathered the storm. And on every occasion, the press has basically forgotten about these things. And that's why the last 1,000 articles you can pull up on Palantir, and the ones that have covered the last few days, and the ones that will come up in the next few years, almost invariably fail to mention any of the things that a more ideal society's media apparatus would think to mention.
Can I just jump in real quick and ask, it's not hard for me to follow or make sense of what you're saying, except for the fact that our savior, Joe Biden, won the last election. So if Thiel was all powerful and able to do all that you're saying, why was again our great hope and savior, who's going to correct all the wrongs in the world in any moment now, in Joe Biden? How come he won?
Oh, no, so he's not all powerful, and even if he can't take every election, I mean, he could take that 2016 election because that was theirs to take, because they ran Hillary Clinton, and they, you know, and in Hillary Clinton's defense, which I'll go ahead and waste time making, you know, it was difficult conditions. There was a lot of anti-establishment momentum that could be harnessed by a very clever person like, say, Peter Thiel and the network he had set up already. But no,
he's admitting he's trying to do it again. He's admitting he's trying.
Oh no, yeah. He's already, remember, Thiel's already opening that guy. I can't keep learning his name. He's running for the Senate. He's the one that for the last few months that, you know, Thiel has been openly putting money into Trump supporter. He's the one who was cheering on the Kyle Rittenhouse. What is it? Him being found not guilty. And not only that, which, you know, whatever, went on and talked about how Kyle Rittenhouse is a great hero, and also how this case was a tremendous, unprecedented travesty of justice. That's one of the guys he's been backing. Anyway, so, but besides all this being said, because it's very hard for people, it's really hard to get to the point where I can convince people that we are close to a point of no return. Let me illustrate this better with another picture. I believe I sent you a picture of Andrew Arnhauer.
Yep.
I can probably show it on mine. We'll see if mine picks up.
Okay.
See if we can get Andrew Arnhauer there. This is Weave.
Yeah.
Andrew Arnhauer. There we go. Thank you. There we go. Well, the contrast is nice, interesting, different. You got better contrast. Anyway, that's Steve and all his different colors. I've known Weave since 2007. I met him in the Chan culture. We were both editors at Encyclopedia Dramatica. People be too complicated to explain what that is. He was a troll, a hacker. He was involved in some of the amusing, like, internet humor culture back then. Lost touch with him. Thankfully, I wasn't terribly fond of him. Although I did respect his abilities as a memetics practitioner, as someone who was able to channel the internet waves, you call it, into something. Both him and I were very good at that. Anyway, I later ran into him again because he was attacking me pretty viciously in the weeks before I was finally arrested by the FBI in 2012. And then while I was in prison, and he was actually in prison shortly afterwards for a sort of a hack of AT&T that wasn't really a hack, and became a cause celeb because he was being unjustly prosecuted. He got out of prison, and it became gradually clearer and clearer that he had gone Nazi. In fact, he made this clear. He started openly discussing this in 2014. So imagine my chagrin as someone who sort of took a bullet for a lot of people by virtue of helping to foil this Team Themis scheme and having pursued these other schemes that Palantir and these firms were going after, and then going to prison for that. Imagine my chagrin when, you know, after years during prison of writing for The Intercept. Ben Greenwald hired me for The Intercept. I had a column that was very popular in a local Dallas magazine. They brought it on. I won them the National Magazine Award and a few other awards because I'm the best columnist in the world. And years later, I come across an exchange that's been floating around among what you might call my community for a while, which I had never gotten around to reading. Just a few days ago. It turns out that Weave, the Nazi, who is based in Eastern Europe now, we don't know where he is. People have been looking. Who ran Daily Stormer's site for them, for instance, for a number of years. I don't know if he still does. And again, when I say a Nazi, I don't mean just he's a Nazi as a swastika tattoo. We got a lot of that in prison, you know, doesn't necessarily cause any direct effects. I mean, he's a Nazi who was active in doing what you might call Nazi stuff. Imagine my chagrin to learn that he was approached by Pierre Omidyar and Peter Thiel in 2014 and put to work for them, and has continued to work, at least for Peter Thiel, ever since. Probably on some of the things that helped to throw the election, in terms of memetics, taking control of the alt-right. Imagine my chagrin to learn that that he probably met Omidyar through Glenn Greenwald. And imagine my chagrin to learn that the first thing they had him do, that Pierre Omidyar had him do. Pierre Omidyar is the funder of Intercept. He went to Glenn Greenwald. And Greenwald had the Snowden emails and said, "Here's $500 million. Let's make this great new website, this new outlet that will change things and will help leakers. We'll keep them safe." Imagine my chagrin to learn that the first thing that Weave was called upon to do by Pierre Omidyar at the same time, while they were starting the Intercept, was to go after, to approach a young woman that I had gotten a lawyer. She was one of the PayPal 14 who were being prosecuted for a DDoS attack on PayPal in protest of Amazon and PayPal and all them shutting down payments to WikiLeaks. Imagine him, on behalf of Omidyar, saying, "Hey, you guys need to stop attacking Omidyar, and here are the reasons why." And the whole conversation was posted yesterday, and it's extraordinarily indicative of what's happened.
And is this why? So this is okay. That's what I didn't understand when I saw you were tweeting yesterday at Glenn Greenwald. This is what you were talking about.
Yep. So
okay.
Yeah.
Because Glenn now, but you're not saying, because you said probably. So you don't.
When I say probably, I mean almost certainly, and I'll get into the specifics of that later on, because there's some elements here that some people who were still out of prison at the time and were around know better than I do, because a lot of this happened in 2014 when I was still locked up. But I mean almost certainly. I mean because Glenn came to know Weave. Weave was brought around back at when we got out of prison, among a lot of the activist stuff, because again, as yet he was not known as a Nazi quite yet, except among those who knew him well, I guess, and didn't care. And so there's a movie called Hacker Wars, a documentary called Hacker Wars, that's about me, Jeremy Hammond. Both of us are anti-fascists. Both went to prison over the same incidents, over going after companies like Corvus that help Bahrain and Saudi Arabia press dissidents, and me, Jeremy Hammond, and Weave, because Weave was sort of rolled into the activist, hacktivist whatever deal, out of naivety. There's also a New York Times op-ed from 2013 that compares both me and Weave to Socrates. On the again, it's still before Weave is known as a Nazi, but again, Weave was not an activist. He was never an activist. He was always a piece of shit. He just happened to get prosecuted wrongly for some activisty stuff. But yeah, anyway. 2 years ago, an article came out in BuzzFeed that confirmed a lot of the things that had been floating around about the possibility that Weave was working for Peter Thiel. The BuzzFeed article was about a lot of the far right and racist groups that Thiel had been meeting with and funding secretly. And among those, among the elements that were shown to have had been funded by Thiel was Weave. Weave was worth funding from Peter Thiel's standpoint. Weave was very, very talented, very capable. He is among those of us who from the very beginning understood the possibilities inherent to the internet, who knew that countries could be overthrown, elections could be changed, and unlike me, he's a hacker as well, and that is something that should be kept in mind in the weeks to come, because there's going to be some other issues involving Weave and involving Thiel and involving hacking that will be explored. So anyway, to put it to recap, since this is all very convoluted, and I apologize for that. For a number of years, this person, this German-born, I'm going to add again, German-born man, Peter Thiel, who opposes democracy, who has accrued huge amounts of power in the intelligence community, among military contracting, within the UN, within ICE, police agencies, predictive policing. If you've heard of that, that's one of the things that Palantir does. In New Orleans, they're trying it out. These are all things that track back to Peter Thiel. This person has been using a openly neo-Nazi hacker to various ends for a number of years, and it gets worse because Glenn Greenwald, one of several people who I served to the extent that I was willing to die or go to prison, and luckily only had to do one of those things, because I admired them so much and thought they were the future. They were the top. They were the wedge we had in order to fight the establishments in the right way. Glenn Greenwald has been, and this is something I did not realize until recently. So, and I'll go back and say a lot. There's been a lot of conversations for years among, and I've been asked this, and I've asked others, what is Greenwald's deal? Why is he doing some of the things he's done? They don't seem to track. And there's different theories, and there's people I know who knew Greenwald in college a long time ago personally, and who dealt with him. And my own conclusion is there's just something wrong with him, something wrong with his head. I mean, in a way, it's probably not uncommon among civil litigators like him, or people who gain power, people who do very well in life. There's something wrong with his moral compass, which is shocking to me because I thought quite the opposite a long time ago. Anyway,
and what can you if not to get you off track, but what are
I'm already off
what
track,
is the behavior? Well, what is the behavior that has you concluding this? Because I don't follow him that closely, so other than going on Tucker Carlson, I don't really know what he's doing.
Yeah, so here's a good example. So you'll remember the whole thing about Team Themis and Anonymous 2011, where we exposed this whole plot, that Palantir was running to go after these journalists. Well, Glenn Greenwald was one of the journalists, and if you go back and anybody just Googles Greenwald and Themis and Palantir, you'll find that we presented this to him. We said, look, here's what they were going to do to you and these other groups and blah blah. And he's like, oh shit, and he wrote about it, and I went to prison over that. So it's kind of weird. And then, he wrote articles about how I was being prosecuted, like everyone was doing at that point, being prosecuted for my, in retaliation for the things I had brought to light about powerful people and companies like Palantir. So I think it is kind of odd that it turns out he's secretly been in league with Thiel for a couple of years now, at least, and is now actively defending him and everyone close to him. And, in a way that I was not, again, this is the last thing we discovered in the last 2 days, but I was just not aware of. That's one of the odd things, because again, Peter Thiel runs a huge intelligence network that is not libertarian, not civil libertarian, went after, engaged in extraordinary crimes against the public over and over again. And and he's been my arch enemy for 10 years. And rather than, and for some reason, Greenwald has decided that Thiel is the one to back. That's kind of weird. Again, we went from Thiel targeting Greenwald and all these people, and Thiel's bad, to suddenly, to Greenwald having some kind of relationship with Thiel and his buddy Pierre Omidyar. I should clarify. Let me clarify this. So Pierre Omidyar and Peter Thiel are both they're part of what Weave, in these conversations we published the other day, what Weave refers to as the PayPal mafia. Guys who made all their money on PayPal and eBay and all that. You can see in those messages involving Weave, the neo-Nazi, that Peter, that Here's what he tells our friend Mercedes Hafer, one of the activists that he's trying to manipulate or bribe or intimidate on behalf of Omidyar. He says, "Look, Omidyar is well liked. Don't attack him. And tomorrow I'm meeting with Thiel's right hand man." So Thiel and Omidyar work together in different ways, and have apparently, it seems, for quite a while. I mean, obviously work together on PayPal and eBay, but have
See,
since
because
then,
this is interesting, right? Because you mentioned this because Omidyar is presented, or has been previously presented, as like the left leaning of the ruling elite who would fund The Intercept and say he wants to turn his eBay money into good journalism. And then you're saying now, and then of course Peter Thiel is on the opposite end politically. I never knew that they had any overlap. I just
well, here's the interesting thing. Here's the real interesting thing about Omidyar.
Yeah.
Before he started The Intercept, to facilitate the Snowden emails, which Greenwald had and Laura Poitras had. Laura Poitras later washed her hands of this at some point, and she's the reason I was able to leak a bunch of documents regarding the closure of the Snowden archive a couple of years ago. Omidyar, before he started The Intercept, wrote publicly. See, I want to make sure I get the exact quote. Omidyar traders. Omidyar
So while Barrett is looking that up, please, folks, click like, join, subscribe, click the bell, all that good stuff. Help us keep the lights on, as they say, and tell a friend to tell a friend, as the ear doctor encourages. Invite them on in, or like my man Math Hoffa would say, get in here.
Hold on one second. Anyway, so we'll find the actual tweet again, because I want to provide the exact language. But it was basically him saying leakers should be prosecuted.
That's Peter Thiel.
This is Pierre Omidyar.
Oh, Omidyar said that.
Omidyar,
after
yes.
paying all the money for the Snowden archive.
Before. See, before he got into this, he had said that. Those were his actual beliefs. He was already tied to the intelligence community prior to this. There's a couple good articles. One is by Tim Sharrock, I believe, who I've known for a while. Did the first book on Booz Allen Hamilton years before Snowden. Who was employed there, revealed stuff about that. Great book about it was a great article about Omidyar's ties to the intelligence community. See, a lot of us have been trying to figure out exactly what's been wrong with The Intercept and Greenwald for a while. You see, some of us worked for The Intercept. Ken Silverstein's another good example. He used to write for Harper's, a bunch of other outlets. A good friend of mine left The Intercept.
But Glenn left The Intercept.
Well, he did, but here's the thing. Glenn left The Intercept over two editors that I left The Intercept over right after I got out of prison. Different reasons. They wouldn't run his stuff. Some article that he wanted to write, but that wasn't the real reason he left The Intercept. The real reason he left The Intercept is because of the degree to which The Intercept has been is compromised, tainted. Like there are some things that are just not going to stay unexplored forever, and some of them involve the Reality Winner prosecution. Some of them involve the Daniel Hale prosecution. Some of it involves the fact that it involves the fact that Reality Winner and John Kiriakou have both openly denounced some of the writers at The Intercept for having gotten them imprisoned. There's a lot more there. Sam Biddle, guy who was one of the guys who was given the Reality Winner documents, he had previously celebrated my sentencing about a year before this. And years before that, he had written an article in cooperation with some FBI cooperators, and one who was had been hired by H.B. Gary, one of the firms that we exposed. Wrote an article about how terrible Anonymous was. This was about a month after I was raided by the FBI. It's when we were trying to gain support from the public. And the article is filled with things that Anonymous did not actually do, but were actually done by federal cooperators. And I know this because I have all the correspondence. I had the correspondence between him and them, and because he reached out to me for the article and did not mention any of that. And it goes on and on. Trust me. Sam Biddle was hired.
In other words, if for me to simplify it for myself, what I'm hearing you say is that Omidyar and Thiel are opposite ends of the same coin.
They are national. They both value national security. Neither of them are interested in whistleblowers, except to the extent that they realized it would be a great opportunity, with Greenwald to set up something that would intercept leaks. And they did so in conjunction with the intelligence community that both have been connected to firmly. And the evidence, the pieces of there, the things that have been for years before any of us really knew what was going on. There is a lot that could have indicated that. For instance, there's a fun fact. One of the several people who were bylined on the Reality Winner article, in the document before it was Reality Winner was known.
And just quickly say who Reality Winner is, real quick.
Right. So Reality Winner was a NSA employee who leaks documents regarding Russia and the election, and then sent them to the Intercept because the Intercept was the one was supposed to be able to handle these things and really cared over, and blah blah. You could trust them. Leaked him to the Intercept and was arrested pretty quickly after. And later on, as noted, even by Intercept's own internal report, or second one anyway, the first one was a whitewash. That had something to do with the handling of those documents by the people they were given to. Sam Biddle is one of the people they were given to. Another of the people they were given to was a fellow who had only wrote that one article for the Intercept, was not a regular writer, and in 2020 moved on to his new job as spokesperson for the NYPD. Richard Esposito. Another guy who was involved in that article. What's his damn name? Anyway, as John Kiriakou can tell you, he was a guy who got John Kiriakou caught when John Kiriakou, I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing his name, revealed the torture program. John Kiriakou was a CIA, longtime CIA operative who revealed the torture program to this reporter. So, of the several reporters who, for some reason, were all needed to write this fucking article, but the Reality Winner documents, not a single one of which should have been allowed to work at any media organization, much less anything involving whistleblowers. And after that occurred, and after I'd already left the Intercept just because I was sick of it, I made Glenn Greenwald and Jeremy Scale aware of look, hey, here's what Sam Biddle's done in the past. He has FBI ties, dude. He's gone after me and associates of mine in ways that involve disinformation with the FBI, with FBI cooperators, some of whom have Nazi ties. Why is he here? John Cook, why was he the first editor? John Cook is wrapped up in this whole. There's a lot of force, and anyone, if they just look up my name and any people's name, if you look up Barrett Brown and John Cook, you'll find some stuff. And bottom line is, better yet, you can see about John Cook right now. But if you look up Sabu, John Cook, Adrian Chen, or Sabu, Sabu, John Cook. Great article by Del Cameron or Dan Stuckey, I forgot which one, but maybe Andrew Blake as well, from 2014, showing that they were trying to. Anyway, just look up John Cook. That was the first editor of the Intercept, and that is a very suspicious choice because he is absolutely fed it up. Let's say he is a creature of the feds to some extent.
So listen, because in part because my computer is slowly dying, and just another hour has gone by, and I can't just be here all day, unfortunately. We definitely have to do this again, and because there's so much more, and I haven't even gotten too far into your memoir yet. So I really want to read that and talk with you some more about that. But just to put a bow on this part of of this today's discussion, this thing with Joe Rogan that's getting all this attention is actually much more nefarious. And one question that I did want to ask is that, to what extent do you think, so as I've just been, I haven't paid too much attention, but as I've just been looking at a little clip here, a headline there, whatever here, a few minutes there, it feels like a lot of what is supposed to be this, well, all white, I was going to say predominantly white, but this white alternative, I guess, left of center media environment is coming to defend Rogan. And I'm wondering, to what extent is that just a sort of affinity for him or his politics or his worldview, or to what extent do you think that the Palantir, Thiel tentacles have reached beyond even just Joe Rogan, or is he big enough to influence all of the so-called lesser?
Oh yeah. So in this case, I think I would imagine most of it's organic. I have not looked closely at how this has played out. I did not pay attention at all until someone sent me the thing about his dealings with Andy No, because as you may remember, Andy No is helped get me arrested a few months ago.
Right.
Basically, between Peter Thiel, Claire Lamont, and Andy No, all of my bans on Facebook, which were sometimes reversed and then eventually, on Twitter, all involve these people. I went to prison for Thiel. Went to prison here went to the immigrant center here in the UK because of Andy No. Banned a couple times on Twitter because of Claire Lamont. They're all part of this little group. And so that's it. The point here isn't that they're going to be mean to me. The point is, think about that. Anyway, so I don't think I'm not sure how much of this involves the dynamics there involve Thiel or anybody else. Obviously, some of them do, in so much as Glenn Greenwald. You'll also have people like Yasha Levine. That's his name, Yasha Levine. Anyway.
Yeah, Yasha Levine. I mean, I only know him because of the Surveillance Valley book, which I really appreciate. You about to mess that up for me too?
Yasha Levine has began working for Thiel in 2013.
Are you serious?
Yes. I don't know if he does still, but he definitely did between 2013 and probably 20, maybe still at 2017, 2018. And we can go into that another time. But and I've confronted him about this, and he's reacted the exact same way that all my targets do, with silence, like Greenwald. And that's another great thing. If anybody wants to know if Greenwald is on the up and up, they can go look at my Twitter there, Barrett B, and see our exchange. Remember, I'm a guy who's known Glenn Greenwald since 2009. Me and him helped out Michael Hastings together when Hastings, we've known each other for a long time. I took a bullet for him and a bunch of other people with the HB Gary stuff, and they were after him. And then they came after me. Went to prison, won them a National Magazine Award. He argues a lot. Greenwald is not known for being reticent about arguing on Twitter. He'll argue with like cool guy Philadelphia X14, So the fact that he will not respond to me, even to direct an accusation, or to anyone mentioning my name or asking about me, whether it be a journalist or anyone else, it's common. It's a common thing. And the reason is because as much as I am a kind of worthless, there are a couple of things I'm very good at, and one of them is going after people with only when I have the goods. Greenwald is so if Greenwald were an honest arbiter, if Joe Rogan were an honest arbiter, if these were guys who were really anti-establishment, they would not be conducting themselves the way that they are now. And that's the other thing is that we should do another show on this next week, because there's some other elements here that are really important that obviously need to be explored aside from the details and what other Nazis we have, because we've got more Nazis tied directly to these people. But let me wrap up. Let me conclude my point by saying after some 12, 13 years of working within the transparency activist community involving, maybe Anonymous, Telecomics, WikiLeaks, blah, blah. I've, for a number of reasons, I can no longer do so. It's too, the culture is too screwed up, and there's too much tolerance for FBI informants. So, you know what? Let's talk about this another time, actually. I'm gonna give it a good go when I explain what the story is. But bottom line is that I think that given in part because of these Thiel things, in part because Palantir has been so good at going after their enemy, which has been these groupings I've been involved in, they have managed to take these things apart that I've been involved in. They've managed to recruit, to persuade a lot of people, and Weave has been involved, just like he is in those conversations, that hacker, with a lot of them. But I'm working from here on exclusively with Black activist organizations, most of the Black Churches of America, simply because I need to be around people who understand that cops could be dangerous. And some of the community I've been involved in over the years have had trouble understanding that, and have and that's why so many things that could have happened, that could have gone right the last 10 years have not, because a lot of sacrifices have been squandered. That's probably a convoluted way of saying it, and there's more to it, but and I'll explain more about that another time.
No, definitely. I'm happy to have you back on as many times as it takes to get to as much of this as we can, because it's fascinating and terrifying, and definitely different from what we hear most elsewhere. So, Barrett Brown, thank you very much, man. I appreciate you coming through again. We'll definitely stay in touch and do this again.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right, anytime. All right, everybody, before my computer completely dies, I really appreciate you all sticking around. So many of you have for the whole 3 hours, and those who will see this later, I appreciate you as well. Please don't hesitate to follow up with me and with us directly, and or we always encourage, as my man Pierre over there at Comedy Hype, that if we didn't get to it and there's more to get to, that you just go ahead and jump on in there and
put it in the comments.
And we'll catch you again here. I'll be back on Monday. There's a lot coming up, and there's a lot to get to on the channel that all of us need to catch up to. So please support the channel, like, share, subscribe. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate you. Thanks to all the guests today. Thanks to Aaliyah and Josh, who helped out in the background. Peace to everybody, because I know you're willing to fight for it. Catch you next time here at I Mix What I Like. Peace, everybody.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.